The pink-haired young woman stretched her arms high into the air, a massive pair of ornate pruning shears resting in her hands. After working from morning until evening, every part of her body ached. She rubbed her sore shoulders and leaned against the trunk of a large tree, hoping to enjoy a few moments of peace. Instead, the tree began to speak. It happily praised her work, saying how nice it felt after the trimming. Then, without any shame, it asked if she was finished already, and told her to hurry up and cut the branches at the very top as well. Her eye twitched with annoyance. Tired beyond her limit, she shot the tree a cold glare and warned that if it did not keep quiet, she would cut down its entire trunk instead. The tree immediately backed down in fear, and with the chatter finally over, the young woman sat beneath it and let out a deep sigh over her exhausting life. As she rests, she looks up at the sky and reflects that she has already lived in this world for 19 years, recalling that her life began after she died exactly 19 years ago. In her previous life on Earth, her name was Lee Ji-hyun, and she was just an ordinary high school student in South Korea. Her memory flashed back to the day the college mathematical ability assessment finally ended, a stressful time filled with anxious test takers walking the streets. Walking home while checking the answer key on her smartphone, Jaehyun was relieved to find that her scores came out much better than expected. Her relief was cut short when she noticed a distressed crowd gathering near a bakery. A girl from her school was crying hysterically because she believed she had failed the exam and wouldn't make it into college. Ji-hyun looked on, thinking about how the harsh educational system brainwashes students into believing their lives are completely over if they don't get into a top university. Suddenly, she looked up and noticed another desperate student standing precariously on the edge of a high ledge, seemingly preparing to jump. While others panicked or called emergency services on 119, Ji-hyun felt a sudden surge of ethical consciousness and rushed toward the ledge to help. She called out to the student, telling her not to make such a hasty decision and pointing out that official results weren't even out yet. The crying student expressed her deep fear of how her parents would react if they found out she failed. Showing her own exam identification slip, Ji-hyun tried to comfort her by revealing that they went to the same school and introducing herself as Lee Ji-hyun from Class 3. She gently extended her hand, urging the girl to climb down so they could talk things through. The student finally relented, but as she tried to step down, she slipped. Driven by a desperate instinct to save the person in front of her, Ji-hyun lunged forward to grab her, losing her own footing and falling off the edge instead. Plunging into the dark void, that fateful fall became her very last memory as Lee Ji-hyun. Shaking off the grim memory, the young woman sighs again, muttering that her past sacrifice was all in vain, which prompts the talkative tree to pipe up once more and ask what could possibly make a young lady sigh so deeply. The tree still pesters her about trimming its top branches, but she tells it to be quiet. She reflects on how the radiant place she woke up in after her death wasn't Earth, but rather a fantasy realm known as the Vantria Empire. In this new dimension, every person is born with a distinct special ability that they can nurture to become incredibly powerful, with the most talented individuals even earning imperial invitations. Her own unique ability was the power to hear the voices of plants. After spending 19 years cultivating this gift, she was officially recognized by this world system as a professional gardener under her new name, Sylvia. Exhausted from her daily duties, Sylvia falls asleep on the floor as soon as she enters the house. Suddenly, she is startled awake by a presence and opens her eyes in shock. Standing directly before her is a mysterious, imposing silver-haired man. Seeing her shocked reaction, the man looks at her intently and asks if she can actually see him. His voice resonates inside her head, just like the whispers of trees, even though he doesn't look like a tree spirit. As she wonders who he is, he reaches out toward her, prompting her to yell in panic and hurl a handful of small round objects from her pouch straight at his face. The objects pelt his forehead with a loud thud, making him cry out in pain, which leaves her huffing and breathing heavily, completely surprised that her attack actually worked. The man quickly backs away, leaving a blur of movement as he tells her to stop and suggests they have a little chat, but she panics even more, telling him to stay back and throwing another wave of seeds right at him. After a brief title card for Sylvia's garden, the scene shifts to the two of them sitting opposite each other at a small round table, where she demands that he identify himself. He gives the name John Doe, which she immediately rejects as the fakest name on Earth. He seems unfamiliar with the word Earth, but she refuses to let him change the subject and presses him again until he sighs and tells her to just call him Terran, explaining that he cannot reveal his real name for specific reasons. Once that is out of the way, she tries to figure out what he is. wondering if he might be a ghost before realizing a normal human ghost wouldn't be visible to her. She deduces that he must be a tree spirit, a label he quickly and eagerly accepts, claiming he is a tree spirit who has lost his memory. Content that the mystery is solved, she gets right back to work, walking over to tend to a branch cutting. Taryn watches her, questioning if it is truly possible to grow an entire new tree from just a branch cutting, to which she proudly blushes and replies that while the average person might fail, she absolutely can. She speaks gently to the cutting, telling it to wake up and rise and shine, but when she hears Taryn muttering about needing 5 more minutes, her tone sharpens, warning him that she will only ask nicely once. She channels her energy, causing a swirling rush of wind to gather around her hand, and as she clenches her fist, a sudden surge of growth erupts from the plant. Taryn watches in absolute shock as a small sprout instantly flourishes, leaving him completely amazed by what he is witnessing. He asks for her name, and she casually gestures to the sign on her shop, prompting him to realize she is Sylvia, the Empire's most prized gardener. Understanding how she performed such a feat, Taryn asks why someone with her incredible skills isn't working at the palace. Sylvia explains that while she has received countless invitations, the palace would simply work her to the bone, whereas running her own shop allows her to be her own boss, set her own hours, and make much more money. With the planting finished, she notes that all they have to do now is wait for rain, and she cheerfully declares it is break time. She tells Taryn not to just stand there and asks him to give her a hand, but as he moves, she lets out a startled gasp, noticing something bizarre. Taryn starts to speak, pointing out her reflection, but before the thought can be finished, the chapter ends, leaving the mystery of his true nature lingering in the air. Someone suddenly calls out to Sylvia's name, and the moment she hears it, panic flashes across her face. Without a second thought, she bolts straight into the shop, quickly flipping the sign on the door to closed, before slamming it shut just as a young man named Taryn arrives, holding a potted plant. Taryn stands there in complete confusion before setting the plant down on a table with a thunk. As he starts to mention that he thought someone was outside, Sylvia instantly hushes him, urging him to stay quiet because she thinks the person outside cannot hear her. Curious, Taryn asks if the visitor is some kind of loan shark, but Sylvia replies that it is not exactly like that. Outside, an older gentleman stands with his hat in hand, pleading for Sylvia to stop hiding and open the door. He insists that he knows the shop is not actually closed at this hour, and calls out that it has to be her inside. Sylvia quietly chuckles while Taryn watches in disbelief. The man outside begins bargaining, offering to double her usual pay, causing Sylvia's eyes to light up with interest. When she still does not respond, he desperately raises the offer to triple the pay, along with a bonus, begging her one last time. The moment Sylvia hears the promise of triple pay, the door slowly creaks open. Wearing a radiant, sparkling smile, she warmly greets him as Mr. Majordomo and happily invites him inside. She casually explains away her earlier behavior by claiming he had simply caught her in the middle of a nap, leaving Taryn silently thinking how unbelievable she is. After sitting down with tea, Sylvia immediately gets to business, remarking that such a generous offer must mean the job is extremely urgent. Mr. Majordomo spreads out a map showing a remote mountain route, and Sylvia asks what happened there. He explains that the estate of an incredibly powerful individual was consumed by a devastating fire that completely destroyed the surrounding land. Even the garden was reduced to lifeless ash, with not a single weed left growing, which is precisely why they need Sylvia's help. She studies the map for a moment before admitting that the damage will be fairly difficult to repair. When Mr. Majordomo sadly assumes that means it is impossible, Sylvia smirks and corrects him, saying it is not impossible. It will simply cost a pretty penny. Determined to satisfy his master, he readily agrees to whatever price is necessary. Sylvia calculates the fee based on the average size of a capital estate, arriving at a base price of 80 gold coins. Since he is a regular client, she offers to reduce the base cost to 60 gold before tripling it as promised. Without hesitation, Mr. Majordomo accepts and places a heavy pouch containing a 50 gold deposit on the table, explaining that the remainder will be paid once the work is complete. Confidently, Sylvia tells him to return to the shop in 3 days. The short deadline leaves him stunned, but she assures him that everything will be worth it if he simply trusts her. Wishing her Godspeed, Mr. Majordomo takes his leave, and the door locks behind him. Once they are alone, Taryn questions whether Sylvia has lost her mind. He points out that 3 days is not even enough time to restore a single tree, let alone an entire garden. Setting a plant down with a thunk, Sylvia playfully tells him that if he is so concerned, he should come along and watch a professional at work. They gather their tools, sharpening them with steady, rhythmic strokes, and note that the weather is perfect for the task ahead. Their journey into the mountains is met with fierce howling winds, and by the time they arrive at a creaking wooden gate, Taryn is completely exhausted and gasping for breath. Sylvia drops her bag with a thunk and teases him for being out of shape. But Taryn fires back that it is only because they spent ages wandering in circles. He blames the endless detours on the unseen voices surrounding them. At once, murmurs fill the air as spirits of plants call out to Sylvia, asking what took her so long, whether she brought the good stuff, and complaining that they are overdue for a pruning. Amid those murmurs, Taryn asks if she is sure that she knows the way. Sylvia snaps back at him that if he knew the way, he should have guided them sooner. Taryn immediately replies that finding the route is exactly what her map is for, leaving Sylvia huffing in annoyance. Brushing the exchange aside, she says that none of it matters now that they have finally arrived. However, as they push through the bushes and step onto the main grounds, she suddenly falls silent. Looking across the vast, barren building, Sylvia admits that the situation is much worse than she had expected. She explains that she researched the estate's history and learned that the fire had occurred 8 years earlier. It had not been an ordinary blaze, but one created by a powerful fire user. Because of that magical fire, the land has been unable to regenerate naturally ever since. Just then, Taryn glances at the sky and notices dark clouds gathering, remarking that it looks like rain is on the way. Sylvia smiles, calling the approaching rain exactly what they need, and confidently declares that it is time to get to work. Taryn looks at Sylvia and asks what exactly she plans to do. Sylvia, wearing her dark hooded cloak, looks down determinedly and tells him she wants to revitalize this place and get rid of all the awful, dark energy looming around them. Taryn listens with a serious look on his face, reminding her directly that her main job right now is simply to make sure he does not die. Sylvia takes a deep, heavy breath, exhaling softly into the cold night before drawing upon her powers. Bright green magical energy suddenly surges around her, glowing brilliantly against the darkness as a swirling aura envelops her body. She extends her hands forward, and glowing green vines quickly grow and wrap around her wrists, crackling with vibrant life force. The magic bursts outward into the sky like a beautiful green aurora, washing over the dead, barren woods. With a loud cracking sound, the ancient, dried-up tree branches begin to splinter and break apart, shedding their dead outer layers. In an instant, plump pink flower buds swell on the newly awakened branches and burst open into full, gorgeous blossoms. The once dead and eerie forest transforms into a lush, vibrant paradise filled with thick green leaves, blooming flowers, and sparkling light. Taryn watches this happen right before his eyes, completely awestruck as flower petals drift through the air around him. He staggers slightly, looking at the breathtaking scene and wondering to himself how she could have possibly done this, and how such a miracle is even achievable. But the massive strain of using so much life magic takes an immediate toll on Sylvia. She suddenly gasps, her legs give out, and she dashes forward a step before stumbling and collapsing heavily onto the grass. Taryn rushes over to her side in shock, looking at her and quietly asking her what kind of person she truly is. Later on, in a royal carriage, a tense conversation unfolds as the prince asks why they have to go there. The royal official asks His Highness to trust him, even though he cannot share all the details. As they stride into the area, the prince demands to know if something has happened. The official tells him that he can say no more. As they arrive at the estate, the prince steps closer to the majestic pink tree, commanding the official to tell him exactly who did this. The panicked official stammers out an apology, admitting that he secretly hired an outsider to come in and tend to the grounds. The prince cuts him off, clarifying that he isn't upset, but he strictly wants to know the exact identity of the person capable of pulling off such an impossible feat. The official breathes a massive sigh of relief, realizing the young prince isn't angry with him, and says that it was done by a young gardener named Sylvia. A realization hits the prince as he looks at the beautifully restored trees, and he remembers that the palace had actually sent countless invitations to this specific woman to join the ranks of the imperial gardeners, as her name is always spoken of with high praise among the nobles. He then turns to the official and orders him to make another formal request for her services. When the official asks for clarification in surprise, the prince explains that the empress will soon give birth to his new sibling, and he wants that child to grow up enjoying these magnificent, living trees at the palace. He looks up at a perfectly blooming tree, thinking to himself how much he wishes a loved one were here to see it, and softly notes how lovely it all looks. Meanwhile, a completely different trouble is brewing for Sylvia. Far away from the safety of the palace, a sleazy, rough-looking man approaches her, rubbing his hands together with a menacing grin. He nudges her roughly, laughing as he comments that he heard she managed to snag herself a big, wealthy client. He leans in close, mockingly asking the little Miss Gardner if she forgot what day it is, reminding her with a sinister smile that today is their good old collection day. Sylvia looked completely overwhelmed, her eyes welling with tears as she struggled to accept what was happening, while Taryn could only look on with an expression of quiet concern. Sylvia picked up the brown bag of coins with a heavy heart to give it to the man. Taryn asked her if it was really all her money, but Sylvia was too caught up in her own despair to answer clearly. Desperate and furious, she yelled for the man to just take it, and with a sudden snatch, the collector pulled the pouch right out of her hands. The man let out an obnoxious laugh, tossing a couple of gold coins in the air with a smug grin. He squeezed the bag, completely satisfied, noting that it felt like exactly 50 gold pieces. He gleefully tallied the amount, counting the 30 gold pieces she owed, plus 20 more gold pieces, strictly in interest. With a careless toss, he threw down a crumpled piece of debt paperwork onto the floor. Sylvia collapsed to her knees, crying out in absolute devastation as she realized they only had 2,512 gold pieces left to their name. Taryn, completely stunned by the chaotic scene, demanded to know who that man was and why she had just handed over every single bit of her money. He asked point blank if she was drowning in debt, but Sylvia, trying to maintain some dignity, mumbled back that it wasn't exactly her debt. When Taryn pressed further, wondering whose it could possibly be, Sylvia explained that the debt belonged to a friend of her parents. She sighed deeply and stood up, asking him if he was familiar with the typical, overused cliches found in standard dramas. Taryn was confused by the word, but Sylvia just sighed heavily and told him that it was a tale as old as time. She began recounting the history, explaining how a once well-to-do family fell into complete ruin, all because of a co-signing agreement that went horribly wrong. By the time she was born into this world, her parents were already spending their lives constantly fleeing from aggressive debt collectors. She remembered trembling in fear, recalling how she had ended up dying just like that in her past life, only to wake up and face the same miserable cycle. She yelled out in pure frustration, lamenting that life sucked so much because all of her incredibly hard-earned money was going directly into that collector's pockets. As she ranted, her energy completely spent, her eyes began to blink heavily until she finally drifted off right where she was. Taryn noticed her nodding off and gently shook her shoulder, asking if she was seriously sleeping. He tells her she should at least get into a proper bed first, but she is already asleep. He carefully picked her up, her head resting gently against his shoulder, and carried her over to the bed. Looking down at her sleeping face, he realized how incredibly difficult her life had been, and a heavy thought crossed his mind that his own presence might just end up being an extra burden to her. He quietly wished her a peaceful sleep, telling her to rest up for as long as she needed. The peaceful silence did not last, however, because soon enough it was morning, and Taryn was aggressively pulling at the blankets, shouting at her to get up already and asking how long she planned on sleeping. Sylvia groaned, desperately tugging the blankets back over her face, begging him to leave her alone and give her just 5 more minutes. They went back and forth in a frantic tug-of-war, Sylvia struggling to stay asleep while Taryn relentlessly pulled until he gave one massive yank that sent her tumbling completely out of bed. Sylvia hit the floor with a loud thud and sat up, furious, rubbing her head and yelling at him that she was actively trying to sleep. Taryn snapped back that it had already been 2 whole days and that she was going to starve to death if she kept this up literally. Sylvia, still completely drained and miserable, muttered that she was perfectly fine with starving, which left Taryn totally shocked. Dumbfounded by her stubbornness, Taryn suddenly scooped her up into his arms, marched her straight down the hallway while she flailed in confusion, and brought her to the bathroom. He turned on the water, letting it splash into the sink, and sternly asked if she could wash up by herself or if he was going to have to do it for her, prompting Sylvia to grab the shower from his hand. She screamed at him to get out before slamming the bathroom door right in his face. Standing alone inside, her heart began to thump rapidly against her chest, her mind racing as she wondered what he was possibly thinking, why a guy she had only just met cared so much, and why he was nagging her like a worried parent. Sylvia steps into the room straight from the shower, water still dripping from her pink hair, as she finds Taryn quietly tending to a potted plant on the floor. Standing nearby, she lets him know right away that she has no intention of paying him a salary, nor will there be any extra benefits, leaving him to ask what exactly she is trying to get at. She brightly tells him that he will just have to be fine with room and board, which makes Taryn realize she is trying to hire him as a gardener. When Sylvia points out that he does not even need food expenses since he is a spirit, Taryn counters that he can actually eat if he wants to, offering to show her how and asking for her hand. Holding her teacup, Sylvia watches him with confusion, but instead of taking her hand, Taryn suddenly reaches out, tells her to look over, and makes his hand pass completely through a nearby wall or mirror, shocking her so much that she spits her tea out in a wild cough. Taryn checks if she is okay, and a completely baffled Sylvia demands to know how he managed to become translucent like that. Taryn admits he is not entirely sure himself, explaining that it first happened the day she fainted. He discovered that whenever he is in direct contact with her, he becomes more tangible and real, and he suspects his overall spiritual abilities are increasing because he pushed past his limits and used a massive amount of power right before he originally passed out. Stepping away from the conversation for a moment, Taryn hands Sylvia a towel and tells her she needs to dry her wet hair first. Sylvia takes it, realizing she was supposed to be angry with him, but she lets out a huff and sits back down to sip her tea while Taryn begins to dry her hair for her. She remarks that she never thought in all her years she would be doing something like this, prompting Sylvia to look up and note that he does not even look that old. Curious about his true nature as a tree spirit, she asks if he is 100 or maybe even 1,000 years old, but Taryn simply replies that he is 19. Sylvia gasps with delight, realizing they are the same age, but Taryn completely freezes up at the news. Sylvia asks why he is reacting so dramatically to her age, jokingly calling him Mr. Tree Spirit, but Taryn just stares down at her in disbelief, muttering about her being 19 and realizing just how tiny she is. Annoyed by the comment, Sylvia throws a quick punch at him, and the two share a lighthearted squabble that ends with Taryn letting out a tired sigh. A little while later, Sylvia steps outside and swings open a set of doors, calling out to a gathered group of workers that they only have 30 orders to take care of today. The area lights up with a bright, sparkling energy as she proudly presents the day's tasks with a flourish. Taryn watches her set up and asks why they are out here doing this, leading Sylvia to explain her business philosophy. She tells him that there are 3 golden rules of business: customer care, and customer care. Taryn listens to her speech but feels entirely out of the loop, questioning why she is focusing so much on this when she should be busy with her other job. Looking around, he admits he is completely confused, wondering why they are here when the estate is supposed to be a duchy. Taryn wonders why they aren't at the palace, and what exactly is going on with Glenn's request. Meanwhile, at Sylvia's garden, an absolute chaotic crowd has gathered outside the gates. Sylvia tries to manage the chaos, telling everyone that she is only taking 30 clients today, but the crowd erupts into a clamor, with people shouting that their gardens need urgent care, others pleading for help with a grand restaurant opening, and some complaining that they have been lining up since dawn. Inside the shop, Taryn leans against a tree, looking out at the madness and muttering that it is a complete war zone out there. Suddenly, a hand reaches through, and the crowd is forced aside as Imperial soldiers march onto the property in perfect formation, shouting for everyone to get out of the way and clear a path. Marching right behind them is the head butler, Glenn, who immediately drops to his hands and knees to plead with Sylvia, begging for her help and revealing that this is a direct request from His Highness. Sylvia stands there looking completely unamused as an ominous dark aura surrounds her. Hoping to sweeten the deal, Glenn dramatically reveals a massive payment, offering 100 gold. In Sylvia's mind, she can only picture a greedy, gold-obsessed old man laughing with his tongue out, making her grit her teeth in sheer annoyance. She internally tells him to beat it, recognizing that while she knew he was a head butler for a noble, she never expected him to be serving the imperial family itself. Turning to Glenn, Sylvia flatly refuses, explaining that she is not on great terms with the palace gardeners anyway, and asks why they can't just use them instead. She mentions that she thought rejecting all their previous invitations was a clear enough hint, and tells him her refusal is final. Desperate, Glenn bows even lower, insisting that His Highness personally asked for her and that it can only be her. He explains that the Imperial gardeners claimed the tree they need is a species not found in this world. He then confides a secret, whispering that Her Imperial Majesty is soon to give birth, and His Highness wants to gift his new sibling a magnificent garden. Glenn flatters her, whispering that her skills are far superior to anyone in the palace, and that they can only entrust this task to her. Sylvia smirks, realizing he is just trying to butter her up because she is truly their only option, noting that the tree is impossible to get and no palace gardener could mature it in time. As Glenn despairs, thinking it is completely hopeless, Taryn suddenly steps up, leaning into the conversation and casually asking Sylvia why she doesn't just take the job. Sylvia screams in terror, jumping back and yelling at Taryn not to scare her like that. Taryn holds up his hands defensively, stammering that he didn't mean to, claiming he just thought he saw a bug. Sylvia processes his sudden interference and asks if he really wants her to take the gig. Turning back to Glenn with a completely different attitude, she asks if traveling expenses are covered. Glenn confirms they are, and when Sylvia asks how much, he notes that 4 gold should be plenty. Flashing a polite service smile, Sylvia calculates the total to 104 gold, demanding a 50 gold deposit up front. Glenn slides over the money, along with a special emblem, explaining that it will allow her to move freely about the Imperial grounds, though he warns her that all movements are reported directly to His Highness. Sylvia happily accepts the terms with a greedy grin, thinking about how well things have worked out, since it is the palace after all. Glenn salutes, telling her to ask for him when she is finished, simply, and makes his exit. Once he leaves, Sylvia lets out a massive, exhausted sigh. She turns to Taryn, asking with a sly smile what he has in mind, wondering if he wants a tour of the palace and accusing him of wanting her to accept the job just for that. Taryn looks away, scoffing, claiming he could just waltz right in anyway, but Sylvia cuts him off, reminding him that a barrier surrounds the perimeter, and absolutely nothing can enter without explicit permission. Realizing he pushed her into this for no real reason, Sylvia chugs a drink in frustration, groaning about why she even accepted the job. When Taryn asks if she can just do what she did last time, Sylvia flatly rejects the idea, stating that if the palace sees the true extent of her powers, they would make her sign her life away on the spot. Still, knowing it is the Crown Prince's direct orders, she can only groan in defeat. Sylvia is frustrated that they can't leave her alone. Taryn thinks for a moment and says it is kind of his fault. However, Sylvia gets up, and there's no helping it now. She gets up and says they should get to work. Sylvia steps out the door carrying her wooden bucket. Taryn stands frozen inside the doorway, blinking in total disbelief before realizing she is walking away without him, prompting him to shout for her to wait. As they walk together toward the duchy, Taryn mentions that he thought they were headed straight to the palace. Sylvia clarifies that while they will go to the palace eventually, this visit is step 1. They arrive at the massive iron gates of an estate guarded by 2 armed sentries, where Sylvia introduces herself and announces that she has come to check up on the garden. The guards swing the heavy iron gates open to let them inside. As they walk down the path, Sylvia sternly reminds him about the importance of strict budgeting, because money is no joke. Taryn counters that budgeting feels pointless when all their earnings go straight to the loan shark anyway. Furious at the reminder, Sylvia snaps back at him not to remind her, adding that even if she had all the gold in the world, spending her own money on seedlings would be a huge waste, stomping her foot in frustration as she marches forward. While they walk, a majestic tree spirit appears, catching him off guard. Recognizing the spirit, he wonders aloud if the rumors are true, and if this is a real tree spirit. The tree spirit notes that if he already knows what is happening, he could have told Sylvia himself. When he asks why the spirit did not speak up, the spirit explains the law of nature. Spirits cannot interfere in human affairs unless specifically requested or given explicit permission. The spirit then points out that his question is out of line, since he himself is not in a purely human form, existing instead in a limbo between life and death, and asks if he wishes to be treated as a human. The tree spirit goes on to reflect on Sylvia, explaining that despite her youth, she possesses immeasurable, immense power, making her likely the strongest being in the world. The tree spirit emphasizes the need for caution, stating that the strong experience the greatest losses and the lowest lows, and all the spirits can do is hope she realizes her full potential in due time. Before taking its leave, the spirit makes a heartfelt plea, asking him to take care of Sylvia since she grew up completely alone, and spirits cannot provide her care and affection she deserves. Left alone with his thoughts, Taryn contemplates the spirit's words, wondering what he can do for her. Just then, an older woman greets Sylvia at the estate, expressing her joy and noting that she was just thinking it was about time for her visit. Sylvia apologizes for not coming sooner, but the woman warmly assures her it is no problem at all and expresses deep gratitude for Sylvia taking time out of her busy schedule to help them. The woman leads them further into the garden grounds, where Sylvia gets ready to work, feeling pleased with herself for securing an extra 4 gold coins for travel expenses. Her companion teasedly calls her out, asking if her idea of customer care is just an excuse to steal plant samples for future business, and accusing her of daylight robbery for charging so much extra for travel. Sylvia playfully sticks her tongue out at him, maintaining that people pay a high premium for her top-tier expertise, and orders him to go fetch a ladder. Taryn complies, dragging a heavy ladder over with a groan. As Sylvia climbs up to start trimming, he warns her to be careful so she does not fall. Sylvia casually shoots back that if she falls, he can just catch her, adding that she trusts him. His face flushes red as he processes her words, wondering if she meant anything deeper by it. Sylvia immediately breaks his train of thought by yelling down at him to get his butt in gear and start picking up the fallen cuttings. Startled, he snaps back into action and begins gathering the branches off the ground. Sylvia moves along to the next tree, but as she approaches, she looks down in shock to find the plant severely damaged and dying. Sylvia stands beside a large tree, realizing something is terribly wrong with it. She places her glowing hands against the trunk, activating a burst of magical energy that surges outward. She calls out to the spirit inside, telling it that it can talk now and asking it to explain what is happening. When no immediate answer comes, Taryn wonders aloud if the tree is dead, but Sylvia insists it is not, as she can still feel lingering wisps of its spirit. She taps on the bark repeatedly, demanding to know why it is giving her the silent treatment when she knows it is listening inside. Suddenly, dark misty energy seeps outward around Sylvia. Seeing that gentle coercion is not working, a sinister look flashes across her face, and she turns around, commanding Taryn to fetch her axe. Taryn is stunned, asking if she actually intends to chop the tree down. He walks over toward a wooden bucket to grab her tool, but when he tries to lift the axe, his hands slip right through it with a swooshing sound. Frustrated, he swishes his hands through the bucket repeatedly, discovering that he simply cannot grab the handle for some reason. Taryn looks down in confusion, noting that this clearly is not a normal axe. Sylvia sighs in annoyance at Taryn's failure. She steps over, effortlessly pulls her axe out herself, and calls him useless. Taryn shoots back in protest, reminding her that she has been using him for slave labor and arguing that he genuinely tried to pick it up. Ignoring his complaints, Sylvia swings her heavy axe through the air, with a dramatic whoosh right toward the tree. Taryn watches in horror, asking if she is really going to cut it down. Terrified by the threat of being chopped down, the tree spirit breaks its silence and screams for her to stop, promising that it will talk. Sylvia halts her strike mid-air. She tells the spirit that stopping is a smart move, warning it that this is its absolute last chance and that it had better spit out the truth immediately. Sylvia takes a close look at the tree, noting that she sees no signs of disease or pest infestations, and points out that the surrounding soil is packed with rich nutrients. She demands to know what the real issue is. Sobbing softly, the tree spirit confesses that the whole problem stems from a little 5-year-old kid. Sylvia reacts with utter confusion, asking if it is really claiming that stress from a single toddler caused all this damage. The spirit explains that stress affects trees depending on their personality and the cause, reminding her that it is a ginkgo tree, also known as a maidenhair tree, so naturally it demands to be treated with care and utmost respect. Sylvia realizes that disrespect acts as a severe stressor for this particular species. Thinking to herself, Sylvia realizes Taryn wouldn't understand this, because ginkgo trees are not native to this world. Around 3 years ago, when she first opened her shop, she planted these rare, beautiful, and hardy trees across all the noble gardens to attract elite customers, treating them as the royalty among plants. Shifting her attention back to the tree, Sylvia agrees to speak with the owners regarding the child's behavior, but then leans in close with a severe gaze. She flinches the tree spirit by reminding it that she is the one who brought it into this world, which means she can just as easily take it out. She sternly asks if it remembers what happens when it gets wrapped up in negativity. Terrified and shuddering, the tree spirit apologizes profusely. Sylvia immediately drops her menacing stance, accepts the apology cheerfully, and touches the trunk. With a gentle magic touch, she begins restoring the tree back to its full, magnificent glory. The tree glows against the bright sky, sparkling with energy and rustling as golden leaves flutter down through the air. Below, Sylvia brushes off her hands, counting out roughly 100 trees needed for the Imperial Palace project, and deciding that everything is set. Terran stands nearby in his apron, arms crossed, reflecting on how huge this order is. He notes that even for a grand birth in the Imperial family, 100 trees feels like a massive amount. But Sylvia cheerfully remarks that they can simply keep any extras. She begins wheeling a wheelbarrow loaded with wooden crates of plants, humming to herself as she works. Night falls, casting a deep blue haze over the garden house. Terran rushes out to follow Sylvia, asking why on earth they are heading out in the middle of the night. Sylvia explains that going during the day would draw too many eyes, and she really does not want people thinking she is some kind of tree-talking nutcase. Terran wonders if it would be safer to have people around in case she faints again, but Sylvia laughs it off, saying that growing trees is nothing compared to reviving them. As they move along, Terran notices the strange axe she is carrying and questions its blunt blade. Sylvia reveals that it is no ordinary axe. It is made of rubber, though it acts like a real one if you put enough force into it. She admits she paid 3 whole gold coins for it, noting that it comes in handy for both chopping and intimidation. Terran asks if she really would have chopped down that earlier tree just for not talking, which makes Sylvia stop in her tracks. Turning to him seriously, Sylvia explains the difference between humans and spirits. She points out that even humans with bad intentions can have moments of goodness, but spirits are different. Once a spirit latches onto an emotion, it wholly consumes them unless forced otherwise. She reminds Terran not to forget this truth, addressing him directly as Mr. Amnesiac. Then, her tone softens as she looks at him, mentioning that, because he is so human-like, it almost feels like she isn't alone anymore. In the background, a small spirit silently observes them, reflecting on how spirits cannot give Sylvia the care she truly deserves from a fellow human. Suddenly, a group of tiny, glowing spirits rushes in to help, but their chaotic energy ends up causing a mess instead. Sylvia quickly steps in, shouting at them to freeze and stop, taking the tools away while letting out an exasperated sigh at the state of things. Terran asks what has been bothering her, noting that she has been irritated ever since they arrived. Sylvia points out the surrounding area, complaining about how terrible the soil and grounds look. Even though the palace gardeners said construction was finished and promised to handle the prep work, everything was left in complete disarray. Terran reminds her that she mentioned not being on good terms with those gardeners, wondering out loud if they are trying to send a message or if they simply arrived before the crew could finish. Kneeling down and crumbling the dry, rough dirt in her hand, Sylvia sighs, realizing that before they can plant a single thing, they have an immense amount of hard work ahead of them. Sylvia leans down in the lush green lawn as she prepares to get to work on the soil. She asks aloud, how about starting with purifying that soil, whispering softly under her breath. She adds that she has even brought along some new friends to help out. From high above, the vast courtyard garden comes into view, where Sylvia stands on the open grass while Terran stands a short distance away listening. A soft giggle echoes through the gentle breeze as small leaf spirits whisper back, saying, "That sounds good, Sylvia." One of the tiny, winged plant fairies flies joyfully through the air, clutching a bright green leaf to her chest with a sweet smile, eagerly declaring that she will ask the wind for help as well. Immediately, a massive gust of wind swooshes across the sky, whipping up a brilliant current of air that swirls over the entire garden grounds. The wind continues to howl, blowing past the bottom hem of Sylvia's dark blue skirt. Her sturdy black boots, detailed with gold embroidery and golden ribbons, stand firmly rooted on the green grass as light sparkles around her feet. The wind surges upward around her in a grand display, carrying bright leaves through the air as Sylvia stands tall, her long pink hair flying wildly around her face. She reaches up, placing a hand against her forehead to keep her hair back while squinting against the fierce breeze. Below, her black boots press firmly onto the grassy earth once more. High overhead, spiraling currents of wind sweep through the entire palace courtyard, swirling around the central fountain and cascading over the immaculate stone paths and garden beds. Up in the bright blue sky, light green leaves float effortlessly along the breeze. Sylvia brushes a stray strand of pink hair away from her face, squinting tightly as the air finally settles down. The vast palace towers stand proudly in the background, under a soft blue sky scattered with clouds. Once the wind calms, Sylvia looks back over the courtyard, a bright, triumphant smile washing across her face as she exclaims that now, that is more like it. Suddenly, her vision focuses as her eyes catch something unexpected. Deep within the reflection of her crimson eye, a small, tiny image of herself working in the garden flickers. Her heart begins to thump loudly as a strange feeling washes over her. She wonders to herself what this mysterious feeling could possibly be, feeling a sudden shiver or odd sensation running through her body. She pauses in confusion, thinking there is no way this can be happening, pleading to herself not to tell her that something strange is going on. A sharp voice suddenly breaks through her thoughts, asking what on earth she is doing. Sylvia flinches instantly in surprise, waving her arms nervously and stammering back that it is nothing at all, really. The individual standing nearby hums back in skepticism, leaning in closer. Sylvia's heart pounds wildly again as she swallows hard, trying to keep her composure. The speaker dismisses it with a simple whatever and lets out a gulp, while Sylvia exhales a deep sigh of relief as the tension clears. Sylvia gets back to work, gently patting down the earth with her gloved hands and wiping off the fresh dirt. She stretches her back with a soft crack, relieved that she is finally done. Taking a few steps back onto the path, she turns around to inspect the area, taking a deep breath as she prepares to get a feel for the final layout of the grounds. She speaks aloud, evaluating the surroundings by noting that, judging by the overall palace layout, having all pink trees here would not really work well. A deep, composed voice interrupts her from behind, asking what exactly she proposes instead. Sylvia begins to reply smoothly, saying she would say it is better to adjust the palette, but she suddenly freezes in her tracks, letting out a confused sigh. She turns around completely to look at who is speaking to her. Standing before her is a handsome, elegant noble gentleman with light blue hair and aristocratic attire, holding an ornate walking cane. Sylvia stares in utter shock, completely bewildered, asking herself who this guy could possibly be. For a second, she thought it was Terrence standing behind her, but this person is clearly someone else entirely. The prince speaks directly to her, politely requesting that she answer his question. Sylvia stammers out an embarrassed response, trying to regain her thoughts, and explains that it would be much better to focus on decorating the area with flowers instead of just trees. The prince gazes at her intently, asking if she is saying she refuses to plant the trees he requested. Sylvia takes a closer look at his luxurious outfit, realizing that this guy is definitely a powerful figure or higher up, perhaps an actual nobleman. She holds her ground, explaining that she believes using half the requested trees would be best, but then she cannot resist asking the most pressing question on her mind. Who is he? The prince pauses for a moment, letting out a soft chuckle under his breath. With a smooth, graceful tone, he shifts his demeanor and announces that he shall change his request. Sylvia looks at him with a puzzled question mark floating over her head. The prince looks down at her with a gentle, approving expression, telling her to do with the land as she sees fit, and to let this garden grow exactly as she envisioned it. Sylvia realized the person in question is none other than the crown prince. She remembers Glenn explained that His Highness asked for Sylvia personally. The prince says he is leaving everything in her hands, noting that she is the one who revitalized the estate garden. The crown prince stands tall in his grand black uniform, adorned with golden epaulets and a red sash. He raises a single finger to state his one condition. At the very least, Sylvia must incorporate some of those lovely pink trees into her design. Sunlight filters through a lush canopy of pale pink blossoms overhead. Sylvia, with her long pink hair tied in a ponytail, stands in front of the prince. Internal thoughts flash through her mind as she realizes who she is dealing with, wondering why of all people she has to meet him. Her blue eyes stare intently as she realizes this project is becoming more of a chore by the minute. However, her perspective shifts as a radiant, glittering image of the prince seated on a golden throne comes to mind. She figures that since the crown prince is loaded, she can use this opportunity to pull in a little extra money, reasoning that it won't bleed him dry. Clearing her throat with an intentional cough, Sylvia raises her hand and speaks up, telling the crown prince, "Pardon me." He turns his head to look back at her. Sylvia explains that she has a duty to let him know that any modification to his order could increase the overall price. The crown prince looks at her thoughtfully, repeating, "Increase the price?" Sylvia confirms with a firm, "Yes." Sylvia walks across the stone pathway of the bright garden toward a plot of green sprouts. leaving the crown prince standing behind. She crouches down near the plants while he walks over, staying nearby. She elaborates on her reasoning, explaining that rather than filling the garden with trees, it would be better to plant flowers that match the overall layout. Sylvia points out that her shop does not currently deal with flowers, meaning she would have to find new buds and transport them, which naturally comes at a cost. The crown prince listens quietly before agreeing, saying he sees and will let Glenn know. Sylvia clenches her fist near her chest with a victorious grin, celebrating her successful negotiation. The prince bids her farewell, telling her he looks forward to it and will be waiting to see the garden she creates, giving a polite bow before taking his leave. Once the prince is gone, Sylvia carefully scans her surroundings to make sure the coast is clear. The moment she realizes she is alone, she breaks out into a joyful jump, cheering with excitement. However, Taran suddenly makes his presence known. He remarks on how people normally shy away from or fear those above them in status, but notes that Sylvia clearly isn't normal, adding that she even swindled the crown prince. Sylvia blinks in response and dismisses it, brushing off his comment with a casual flick of her wrist. She admits that she supposes she is pretty fearless, but suggests that might just be because of the ghost of greed inside her. She then pauses, reflecting on the encounter and questioning what the crown prince was even doing out there in the first place, finding it odd that he would check in on things personally. Sylvia continues working around the garden bed, tending to the soil and plants as birds chirp gently in the background. She reaches out, plucking and gathering plant materials into her hands with quick, deft movements. Taran walks up to her, looking slightly skeptical as he asks if she didn't just claim there was an extra charge because she had to gather new flower buds. Sylvia looks back at him nonchalantly and bluntly admits that she lied. Taran sighs, admitting he already knew that. Taran then asks what she plans to do now, noting that the seeds or buds she has look like a bunch of the same type. Sylvia reassures him not to worry, pointing out that she can easily change their species. However, she admits the real problem is that the pink trees requested by the prince aren't native to this world. She strokes her chin in deep thought, wondering what kind of floral arrangement would actually complement them properly. Taran looks at her in disbelief, surprised that she doesn't have a full plan ready after looking so confident earlier in front of the crown prince. Sylvia explains that while she has a few general ideas, using too many different species might make the garden look cluttered, so she is considering using varying shades of pink instead. She then turns toward Taran, asking him if he has any ideas. Taran simply admits he isn't sure. But as he glances around, his eyes suddenly catch the trees already planted throughout the garden, giving him pause. Sylvia and Taran stand together under the leafy canopy of a large tree. The tree asks them whether they are trying to decide what to plant and says it wants to chime in. Sylvia and Taran turn to look at each other, both wearing puzzled expressions. Sylvia speaks up, telling the tree that they are ready to hear what it has to say. After a while, bright cherry blossom trees bloom under a clear blue sky, framing the tall spires of a grand estate. Standing in the middle of a lush green lawn, surrounded by white blossoms, is a noble-looking man with silver-streaked dark hair and a beard, looking upward in complete astonishment. A little further away, two knights in full armor stand chatting near the estate path. Sylvia, now dressed in a stylish red-patterned outfit, short red cape and matching beret, proudly declares that everything is all done. The prince looks out across the transformed grounds, thoroughly impressed. He remarks on how incredible it is that all of this was accomplished in just one day, pointing out the vast bed of delicate white flowers. Sylvia steps forward, explaining that since this garden transformation is meant to mark a new birth, she chose a theme of pure white innocence. She notes that the white flowers complement the specific trees that were originally requested, creating a harmonious and tranquil atmosphere for a mother with her newborn baby. The prince looks at the landscape and admits that it is truly incredible and magnificent, and offers Sylvia the position of imperial gardener. However, she remarks that she has already refused the proposal countless times before. The prince is surprised and asks the reason. Sylvia responds that she has already stated her reasons every single time, but the prince counters that this is the first time he has heard of any such thing. Turning toward the old royal assistant Glenn, Sylvia directly asks how much her travel expenses actually came out to be. Glenn laughs nervously and confirms that it will be 4 gold coins. Sylvia presses on, asking what the going wage for a gardener is, to which Glenn responds that it is 15 gold coins per month. Sylvia confidently tells the prince that she is very high in demand and she is also very expensive, as he can calculate. Her 4 business trips are more than a regular gardener's monthly salary. Sensing her work is fully complete, Sylvia announces that she will now be taking her leave. But just as she prepares to walk away, she pauses. With a swift movement, she turns back around. She points out that due to a change made from the original order, there is an extra charge of 25 gold coins, exactly as previously discussed. Whispers ripple between the prince and his assistant as Glenn grumbles at Sylvia's bold demands. Taryn, who is watching all this from behind a wall, thinks that is very bold of her, but Sylvia remains unbothered, thinking to herself that there is nothing scarier than the ghost of greed. She internally reflects on her past, remembering that she lived her whole previous life in modern-day Korea. Because of her past background, she simply cannot get used to this rigid class system. Interrupting the tense thoughts, the prince steps forward and firmly offers 100 gold per month. Hearing this massive sum, Glenn gasps out in complete shock, calling out to His Highness in utter disbelief. But the prince does not listen to him and says that he wants Sylvia to be the imperial gardener. Taryn sweatily warns Sylvia to watch what she says, while a dark aura surrounds Sylvia as she fumes in irritation. Facing forward, Sylvia forces a strained, overly sweet smile and sarcastically addresses the prince. She grins tight-lipped, holding back her frustration as she claims she never had the chance to properly learn etiquette. Sylvia notes that for this single job alone, she has already received a total of 140 gold. A bag of gold sits alongside piles of shiny gold coins and glittering gemstones. She mentions that a one-time fee for routine maintenance of a noble estate is normally just 30 gold. Beyond that, the wide view of the sprawling palace grounds appears, showing its huge scale. The aerial view displays the detailed architecture, fountains, and trimmed lawns of the estate. A clock ticking right around 8 o'clock emphasizes time passing, as Sylvia brings up the palace's strict schedule. Inside her bedroom, Sylvia lies face down on her bed, groaning that she cannot adhere to those rigid work hours. Back outside, she notes that if they ever require her services again, they can try submitting another official request. Sylvia performs a polite curtsy, lifting her red patterned dress gracefully. Beside her, Taryn looks on nervously as cute pink bunny icons pop up around them. In chibi form, Sylvia stands firm with an annoyed expression, while Taryn timidly fidgets beside her. Sylvia thinks to herself that the prince has to save face and surely won't insist after such a harsh rejection. She turns her back, assuming that settles the entire matter. Standing in the grassy field, the prince stands beside his old royal assistant, Glenn. Pink flower petals gently drift across the lush green grass. The prince smirks softly, thoroughly amused by her bold response. He speaks up, declaring that he will make a request himself, leaving Sylvia startled. Looking calm and confident, he prepares to name his price. He offers an astounding 500 gold, causing Sylvia's jaw to drop in total shock. On top of that, he promises to put her in charge of all the other palace gardeners. A wide shot captures the stunned silence lingering in the open field. Sylvia stands completely frozen in disbelief. The prince casually asks what she says to his offer. Sylvia stammers, completely taken aback by the overwhelming sum. The prince adds that he will naturally take any extra fees into consideration. A close-up shows Sylvia struggling to keep her composure. She mentally slaps herself, telling herself to snap out of it because there has to be a catch. Just as she begins to say she will decline, the prince cuts her off sharply, stating that it is an order. Sylvia lets out a small squeak of fear. The prince sternly warns her that if she refuses one more time, he will take all her acts of disobedience into account. He firmly states that he will see to it she is charged with disloyalty. Defeated, Sylvia drops to the ground with a heavy thud, asking why he must do this to her. The prince gazes at her, composed and unbothered. Pink petals fall around him as he looks down at her. He maintains his smooth, unyielding composure. The breeze continues to blow petals through the garden air. He tells her that not only is she rather interesting, but he was also genuinely pleased with her work on this garden. Cherry blossom petals flutter gracefully across the open landscape. The peaceful scenic view of the estate highlights the beauty of her craft. Sunlight beams down across the vibrant garden grounds. Inside her shop, Sylvia rests her face flat against her desk, utterly exhausted. Taryn sits nearby, watching her groan in misery. She keeps her head buried on the table, overwhelmed by the entire situation. Suddenly, she bursts out, declaring that she has to flee the country altogether. Taryn deadpans and casually asks if she even knows any other languages. Sylvia reacts in anger, slamming her desk and yelling at Taryn, asking whose side he is even on. Taryn calmly explains that this is just how the world works, since the higher-ups hold all the power. He reminds her that this involves the extremely important founding festival. Sylvia argues back that the importance of the festival is the exact reason she wants no part in it. She paces around, stressing over how massive of a deal the founding festival really is. She insists that her professional pride won't allow her to just wing such a major job. Holding up a newspaper, she points out how public everything will be. She worries that doing well will only make her dynamic new enemies, calling it a complete lose-lose situation. Taryn listens quietly as she vents her frustration. He asks why she and the palace gardeners have such a bitter feud in the first place. Sylvia stops to think about the situation. She explains that they obviously hate that she is essentially stealing their job and becoming their boss. Sylvia admits she actually understands where they are coming from and wouldn't want that either. She envisions the palace gardeners constantly comparing themselves to her and mocking her behind her back. She clenches her fist, upset by the thought, adding that she doesn't even have any imperial status to protect her. Taryn gently reassures her, saying that none of this is her fault at all. Suddenly, a loud knock sounds at the shop door. They both freeze as the knocking continues. Sylvia yells out in annoyance at the disturbance. Taryn points out that someone is clearly at the door. Sylvia stubbornly complains that they are closed and wonders why the person can't just read the sign. She stays put, refusing to get up. She grumbles about how stubborn the person outside is being. Sylvia figures they will get tired and give up soon enough. Taryn gets anxious and suggests she should at least check who it is. He gets increasingly fidgety as the persistent knocking continues. The knocking gets louder and faster, rattling the door. Sylvia finally loses her patience and stomps toward the entrance. She swings the door open wide, ready to blow off some steam. She stands in the doorway, prepared to scold the intruder. Her eyes widen in complete surprise. She freezes as she looks down at the unexpected visitor. Taryn peeks over and notes that it looks like a little girl. Sylvia blinks, her annoyance immediately melting away. Standing at the doorstep is a sweet little girl holding up her savings, happily asking to buy one flower. Sylvia thinks to herself that she was fully prepared to slam the door right in her face. But seeing that it's just an innocent child, she hesitates. Sparkles and a cute aura surround the adorable little girl. Sylvia feels completely struck and disarmed by the child's overwhelming innocence. She tries to regain her composure, clearing her throat nervously. She looks down at the young girl standing expectantly. Sylvia's softer tone returns as she explains that if she wants flowers, she is at the wrong place. She gently informs the girl that they actually don't sell flowers here. The little girl innocently replies that she heard this was the bestest garden shop around. Sylvia tries to remain firm, telling the kid that she really ought to go to a proper florist instead. But the little girl clasps her hands together, looking up with big, pleading eyes and begging her, "Please." Sylvia stands stunned, completely powerless against the child's earnest plea. The child tells her that this bouquet is for her mother's wedding. A young girl stands before Sylvia, nervously blurting out that she needs help with a wedding. Sylvia crouches down on the stone path to meet her at eye level, as the child nervously clutches her hands. The girl explains her sweet story, imagining her parents who have been together for 15 years, finally getting married as a little flower girl celebrates nearby. The young girl offers this special request as a remarriage gift for her family. Inside Sylvia's mind, an internal battle immediately breaks out. A little devil version of Sylvia pops up, yelling to just kick the girl out already, while a small angel version counters, pleading that she cannot do that because the customer is just a child. Sylvia winces under the sudden mental headache, feeling utterly torn between business and sympathy. Trying to remain professional, Sylvia asks the young customer what kind of flower she is looking for. The little girl rummages through her pockets, searching for something. Sweat drips down Sylvia's face in sheer tension as the girl pulls out a notepad and holds it up. The child holds out a crude sketch of a flower. Looking at the messy red and yellow drawing, Sylvia slowly tries to decipher the name. Taryn walks up from behind and casually identifies the drawing, noting that it is a flower, meaning destiny and everlasting love. Sylvia's face twitches in annoyance, as she thinks to herself that the dramatic meaning of flower language is hardly the most pressing issue right now. Sylvia thinks that this particular flower has some of the most finicky growth conditions imaginable. It only grows on sheer cliff sides that stand over 3 meters high. requiring harsh, howling winds just to open its petals. Sylvia realizes that because it is impossible to make out the fine details from a child's crayon drawing alone, she will have to go out into the wild and see a real specimen for herself. She taps her chin thoughtfully, holding the notepad as she calculates the reality of the task. Turning back to the little girl, Sylvia holds out an open hand and points out the core problem. Her services are not cheap, and because this request requires an extra, custom trip, there is going to be a surcharge. Sylvia leans down toward the child to explain the financial reality of the job. The little girl, holding her notepad, nervously asks how much it will cost. Sylvia reminds her that this is a very rare and special flower. Factoring in the long travel distance and personal safety fees, Sylvia calculates the final total and tells the girl that it will come out to around 20 gold coins. The moment the price leaves Sylvia's mouth, the little girl's eyes well up with massive tears. Overwhelmed, the poor child bursts out crying in sheer panic. She quickly reaches into her pockets and holds out her entire savings, a tiny, pathetic offering of just 5 bronze coins. Sylvia stares at the 5 bronze coins beaming in the child's hand, completely speechless. Seeing the child's desperate tears, Sylvia lets out a heavy sigh and gives in, telling the little girl that she will give her a very special discount. The young girl instantly brightens up as Sylvia accepts the meager payment. Sylvia instructs her that she needs to go out into the wilderness to track down the flower first, so the girl should return to the shop in 2 days. The little girl bows deeply in deep gratitude, thanking Sylvia profusely before happily running off. Once the child is gone, Taryn steps up, sliding into view to confront Sylvia. He points out that she is already completely exhausted from her last big job at the palace, asking where on earth she thinks she is going. He adds that the sun is about to set, but Sylvia brushes him off, stating that she has to start searching immediately because she cannot recreate a flower she has never seen in person. Taryn tries to stop her, yelling that she has not slept a single wink since returning from the palace. He asks why she does not make life easier on herself and simply grows standard flowers for her shop instead. Sylvia firmly cuts him off with a blunt refusal. When Taryn asks why not, Sylvia explains her philosophy. She notes that flowers are far too fragile compared to sturdy trees, asking what the point even is of growing something that will just die before her. Sylvia turns and begins walking away to start her journey. Taryn suddenly shouts at her to stop. Sylvia pauses and asks if this isn't the right direction. Taryn points in the opposite direction, telling her that the path is actually that way. Sylvia pauses, looking unsure, and insists she is fairly certain the path lies to the left. Taryn snaps at her, warning her never to trust her terrible sense of direction. A crow caws in the background, as Taryn angrily reminds her that this is literally the 3rd time they have walked down this exact same path. Sylvia holds her ears against his loud yelling, begrudgingly agreeing to follow his lead. 20 minutes pass as they continue walking down the path Taryn insisted on taking. They eventually hit a complete dead end. Realizing the mistake, Taryn looks shocked and stammers out a question, asking if Sylvia was actually right all along. He clutches his head in total disbelief, wondering aloud how his directions could possibly be wrong. Sylvia turns back toward him with a smug look, teasingly telling him that nobody is perfect. As they stand on the trail, Sylvia adds that while nobody is perfect, she is about as close to perfection as anyone can get. Taryn stares at her in utter disbelief, stunned by her sheer audacity. Sylvia simply turns around and keeps walking as the sky overhead darkens into night. Taryn reminds Sylvia that he already told her it was getting dark, and that they could barely see anything anymore. Instead of responding, however, Sylvia suddenly begins calling out the name La Falea at the top of her lungs. Taryn is completely confused by her sudden behavior. Just then, a beautiful flowering plant nearby begins to glow. To his surprise, the plant speaks, asking Sylvia if she is looking for it. Sylvia happily replies that she wants to take it back to her flower shop. Curious, the plant asks why. Sylvia explains that a little girl wants to buy the flowers as a gift for her mother. Upon hearing this, the glowing plant transforms into a beautiful fairy. She asks if what Sylvia said is really true. Sylvia confirms that it is, but gently adds that she understands if the fairy does not want to come. The fairy smiles and says that the idea sounds wonderful to her. Sylvia is a little surprised and tries to clarify once more, explaining that her customer is only a little girl who may not be able to take proper care of her. Before Sylvia can continue, however, the fairy gently places a finger to her lips, saying that she already knows. The spirit woman announces that she is not an easy catch, and that the climb might be quite difficult, and then she fades away in thin air. Bright magical flowers glow with radiant energy. Sylvia clenches her hand into a tight fist. She stares ahead with a sharp, focused expression. She turns around slightly to face Taryn. Taryn stands nearby in his apron, looking concerned as Sylvia reaches down to grab a heavy bucket attached to a rope. Taryn tries to step in, telling her to let him handle it. He explains that if she can just connect a strand of her hair to the trowel, then he can manage it. Sylvia grits her teeth, tightening her grip on the thick rope wrapped around her waist. Taryn insists that it is too dangerous, but Sylvia firmly replies that she has to do it herself. Taryn looks up at the towering cliff, where the glowing flowers sit high above, warning her that if she falls from that height, something terrible could happen. He grabs her by the shoulder to stop her, but Sylvia looks back at him and asks who said she is planning on falling, reassuring him that she will be fine. Sylvia begins her ascent up the steep, rocky cliffside, carefully finding footholds. She places her foot firmly on a small ledge as she climbs higher. She reaches her hand up, securing her grip on the rough rock surface. She continues climbing step by step, focused on reaching the top. Below, tiny plant spirits cheer her on, shouting that she is doing great and wishing her good luck. Sylvia keeps her eyes on the ledge above as she pulls herself up further. She reaches out with her hand, searching for another solid grip. The little spirits continue to cheer, telling her that she can do it. Sylvia wipes sweat from her brow, feeling the strain of the tough climb. Taryn watches from the ground, looking anxious as a gust of wind swooshes past. Sylvia reaches high and grabs another rock ledge. She hauls her body up onto the steep incline. She places her boot firmly on a narrow rock outcrop. She takes another step up, reaching closer to her destination. Suddenly, a sound rings out as a piece of the rock under her foot crumbles and slips away. Sylvia gasps as she loses her footing and begins to slide backward off the ledge. She cries out in panic as she plummets downward into the empty air. Taryn gasps in horror, crying out in alarm as he watches her fall. In a desperate move, a large tree branch swings out from the side, with the spirit shouting for her to grab its branch. Sylvia stretches her arm out in midair and manages to catch hold of the branch. The sudden catch halts her fall, catching her momentum in the air. The branch gently sways back and forth through the night air, safely carrying Sylvia downward. She slowly lowers her feet until they touch the ground, stepping off safely. The wind softly whooshes around her as she takes a deep breath, letting out a relieved sigh. The tiny plant spirits erupt into applause, clapping their hands and declaring the trial complete. They offer their congratulations, celebrating her success and telling her that she did it. They cheerfully tell her to leave the rest of the descent to them. Sylvia slumps onto the ground, exhausted. Admitting that she is completely beat, she exhales heavily, sitting down and clutching her injured leg, adding that her knee really hurts. Taryn walks over to her, scolding her gently and reminding her that he told her it was dangerous. He points out that having powers does not mean she is invincible, and as long as she is human, she can still get hurt or die. Sylvia mutters back, telling him to stop nagging. Taryn crouches down beside her and inspects her injured leg. Seeing her scraped knee, he notes that he doubts she can walk with her knee in that condition. He tells her to just hold on and stay still. Taryn then scoops Sylvia up into a piggyback carry to take her home. Sylvia looks surprised and flustered, wondering if he is actually serious. Sweat drips from Taryn's forehead from the effort, but Sylvia decides not to argue. She holds on to him, and he begins carrying her forward down the path. Taryn tells her to not move too much. The next morning, Sylvia waters the magical plant. As soon as the water touches it, the flower fairy, Lafalea, emerges from the blossoms, stretching her arms as if waking up from a peaceful sleep. Sylvia asks how she should take care of her, and Lafalea immediately begins listing her preferences. She explains that she prefers shady places and dislikes direct sunlight. She also mentions that she cannot tolerate hot weather very well. Sylvia carefully writes down every detail to make sure she remembers everything. Then, out of nowhere, Lafalea looks at Sylvia and asks if she is well known around here. Lafalea floats in the room and asks Sylvia why she did not want her to be a gift. A potted plant sits quietly in front of Sylvia, while a close-up shows her blue eyes looking intently back at Lafalea. Lafalea hovers in midair, sparkling softly in the quiet night. Sylvia thinks about how tree spirits can sprout new life even if only their roots remain. She visualizes a solitary tree stump resting on a grassy field, where a tiny leaf sprout begins to grow from its side. But flowers are completely different. When flowers are transplanted into a pot, most of them cannot survive for very long. Dried red roses droop inside a brown pot, dropping dry leaves onto the windowsill below. Lafalea hovers closer, gently explaining that even so, flower spirits get to bring people true happiness. Sylvia freezes on the spot, a small sweat drop appearing on her cheek. Lafalea sits peacefully among lush green leaves, acknowledging that while tree spirits root themselves to live long, carefree lives, she believes that even if it lasts for just a single day, making someone smile makes everything worth it. A bright vision appears of a girl wearing a yellow floral dress holding a glowing bouquet of bright orange flowers, followed by a close-up of the radiant petals covered in fresh dew. Sylvia giggles softly to herself. Lafalea twirls in the air with a graceful flutter of her pink wings. She swoops down and places her hands gently on Sylvia's legs, telling her that everyone has different desires in life, and that she will learn this soon enough. Offering a blessing, bright magical sparkles fill the air. Wearing her flower crown, Lafalea smiles warmth and hopes Sylvia finds her own happiness too. With a soft poof, Lafalea vanishes completely, leaving only floating specks of light. Sylvia slumps her body downward, exhausted from using her magic. Taryn glances over at her, and she looks back at him. Taryn asks if she is okay, and Sylvia assures him she is fine, because fulfilling a client's wish is simply a gardener's duty. She grabs a bottle and chugs it down rapidly with heavy glugs, letting out a refreshed gasp right after. Sighing, she admits that it is finally time for a break, or she might wither away entirely. Suddenly, a loud knock echoes at the door. Frustrated, Sylvia zooms over to the entrance, swings the door open, and yells at the visitor, asking if they can read the sign that clearly says closed and if they realize what time it is. But as she looks at the person standing outside, she suddenly pauses. She recognizes him as the knight from the palace. The knight stands frozen in place, nervously chuckling as he admits he is indeed a palace knight who came to return something she left behind. Looking down, he notices blood on her knee and points out that she is hurt. Sylvia looks at him in confusion. Without hesitation, the knight crouches down and carefully wraps a cloth around her bleeding knee. Standing back up, he tells her he will let her rest now, and promises to visit again when it is light outside, offering a quick wink before turning away. The door shuts with a quiet clunk, leaving Sylvia standing completely stiff and frozen in place. The narrative shifts to the young girl carrying the Lafalea pot. She steps out of the bright hallway into a dark, shadowed passage where a sinister figure awaits. Her footsteps hesitate as she gulps nervously. A door opens with an ominous creak, revealing a dark room where a shadowy woman stands holding a fan. The woman cold-heartedly asks if the young girl secured what was requested. Stammering, the nervous girl answers that she has. The mysterious woman smirks behind her fan, pleased with the outcome. She bitterly recalls how 3 years ago, that wench, referring to Sylvia, arrived and ruined everything for them. In a sudden fit of rage, she slashes her fan through a portrait image of Sylvia. Red sparks and magical crackles burst into the air as she snaps that she will never allow Sylvia to be in charge of the Founding Day Festival. She gazes villainously at the Lafalea flower, explaining its nature. While it is a beautiful flower that blooms under harsh conditions, every rose has its thorn. She reveals that when processed properly, the Lafalea acts as a potent, deadly paralysis poison. Cruelly, she plots to give Sylvia a taste of her own medicine. The scene flashes back to an earlier conversation inside Sylvia's garden office between Sylvia and a merchant trying to buy supplies. The customer slams his hands down in utter disbelief, shouting, "Are you kidding me?" Shocked, he nervously asks how much she is charging. Sylvia stands her ground with an unshakable, stern demeanor. She firmly states her price, 75 silver per sapling, asserting that she will not go any lower because these are not ordinary trees. The customer clenches his fists in frustration. He thinks to himself that because Sylvia looks young, he assumed he could easily trick or overcharge her. To his dismay, he realizes she operates like a sharp, seasoned veteran in business. Hoping to push for a better bargain, the customer nervously suggests buying the saplings together with fertilizer in bulk for 95 gold. Sylvia smoothly agrees to offer a special bulk discount. The customer's eyes light up with anticipation, expecting a discount of 1 gold or 1 silver. Instead, Sylvia drops a single coin into her hand with a sharp clink, offering a discount of exactly 1 bronze. She glares at him coolly, asking if he was trying to swindle her. Defeated, the customer can only sigh in frustration, realizing he never stood a chance against her shrewdness. After buying everything at the agreed price, the man left the shop with tears of joy in his eyes, and Sylvia cheerfully waved him goodbye. Over the moon with happiness, Sylvia began counting her earnings, imagining how she could pay off a slightly larger portion of her debt. However, Taryn told her to stop counting the coins, saying they were not going anywhere, and that it would be better to start thinking about the upcoming festival celebrating the founding of the country. Taryn then asks if she really dislikes the festival that much. Sylvia replies that if he were the one organizing it, he would not want anything to do with it either. She explains that if she orders the imperial gardeners to do anything, all she gets in return are complaints about her bossing them around. Just thinking about preparing for the festival makes her feel like she is about to go through a living hell. When Taryn asks what she plans to do, Sylvia lets out a small laugh and jokes that maybe this will be the night she finally escapes to another country, much to Taryn's dismay. Suddenly, a man appears in the shop whom neither Sylvia nor Taryn expected to see. To their surprise, the unexpected visitor is the Crown Prince. Although Sylvia is caught completely off guard, she quickly greets him. Remembering the bag of gold she had just received, she hurriedly hides it by tossing it into a nearby planter before he notices. Taryn jokingly asks if the prince has nothing better to do, but the Crown Prince calmly replies that he decided to visit Sylvia in person. He then asks if she truly has no intention of taking part in the upcoming festival celebrating the founding of the country. Instead of answering, Sylvia simply responds with a displeased expression. The Crown Prince then reveals that he knows about her enormous debt. He explains that since he failed to persuade her with threats last time, he has decided to try a different approach this time. Offering her a generous reward of 1,000 gold coins for her services, he promises to pay the entire amount up front. Sylvia is stunned by the offer. She briefly worries about her creditor and how the imperial gardeners might treat her, but the reward is simply too tempting to refuse. Without another moment of hesitation, she drops to her knees before the Crown Prince and excitedly declares that she accepts his offer. Watching his friend's latest money-driven outburst, Taryn can only sigh in embarrassment. As soon as the Crown Prince leaves, Sylvia immediately begins thinking about what she should do with so much money. Taryn asks if she plans to use it to pay off her debt, but Sylvia explains that she has already saved enough to cover next month's payment. For the first time in her life, she realizes she has money that she can actually spend on herself. Overjoyed, she starts dreaming about expanding her flower shop and giving it a complete makeover. She even jokes that, at this rate, she might end up buying the neighborhood daycare. She then suggests that Taryn should get a pet, perhaps a kitten or a puppy. However, Taryn quickly refuses, explaining that he is allergic to cats. Sylvia is just about to laugh at the idea of a spirit suffering from allergies when a knock suddenly comes from the door. Curious, the two turn their attention toward the entrance. When Sylvia opens the door, she is greeted by an enormous bouquet of red roses, so large that it completely hides the person carrying it. Assuming it is a customer, Sylvia casually explains that she is not a florist. She says that the flowers are still alive, so she is not sure how she can help. A familiar face then peeks out from behind the bouquet. It is Kale, the former Imperial Knight. Smiling, Kale asks if Sylvia remembers him. Handing her the bouquet, he explains that he did not bring the flowers because he needed a favor. Instead, they are simply a gift for her. Taking Sylvia's hand, Kale politely kisses it, leaving her completely speechless. He seems surprised that, despite owning a flower shop, she claimed not to sell flowers. After stepping inside and admiring the shop, Kale comments on how lovely it is. Introducing himself properly, he reminds Sylvia that his name is Kale, and that, as she already knows, he is an Imperial Knight. Embarrassed, Sylvia simply nods in agreement. Gathering his courage, Kale finally asks if Sylvia will be free during the festival celebrating the founding of the country. He explains that once the ceremonial procession is over, he will have the rest of the day off and would like to spend the festival with her. Sylvia opens her mouth to answer, but Kale quickly interrupts, telling her that she does not need to respond immediately. Instead, she can give him her answer on the day of the festival itself. After encouraging her to think carefully about it, he hurriedly excuses himself, explaining that he still has guard duty. Apologizing for taking up her time, Kale bids Sylvia farewell, saying that he hopes to see her again soon. Sylvia remains frozen in place. unable to say a single word from the shock of Kale's unexpected invitation. She then realizes that Kale has never attended the festival celebrating the founding of the country with anyone before. However, Taryn quickly tells her that she has misunderstood the situation. Completely oblivious to Kale's romantic intentions, Sylvia concludes that he simply does not have many friends and invited her because he wanted someone to spend the festival with. Taryn lets out an irritated sigh and asks if she is really planning to accept Kale's invitation. Sylvia asks why it matters, only for Taryn to reluctantly admit that he had also wanted to spend the festival with her. Instead of understanding what he means, Sylvia simply feels sorry for him, commenting that he does not have any friends either. She then remembers that only she can see him, making it impossible for him to make human friends in the first place. Plucking one of her hairs, Sylvia jokingly says that she can tie it around him as a good luck charm, before cheerfully suggesting that he should just come to the festival with her and Kale instead. Disheartened by her response, Taryn quietly floats away, regretting that he ever brought it up. Sylvia, meanwhile, remains completely confused about why he suddenly became upset. A short while later, as Sylvia places the bouquet of roses into a vase, she remembers Lafalea's wish to become a gift that could bring happiness to someone. Smiling softly, she realizes that she finally understands what the flower fairy meant. Taryn becomes so distracted by Sylvia's gentle smile that he accidentally spills water beside the tree instead of onto it. Watching her, he suddenly comes to a startling conclusion. Sylvia usually smiles only when she sees money. Now she is smiling while looking at the roses. Taryn immediately convinces himself that Sylvia must have fallen for Kale, completely misunderstanding the situation. Sometime later, Sylvia arrives at the Imperial Palace. She plants a young sapling in the garden and waters it with a magical growth potion. Once she finishes, she admires the beautiful garden she has carefully cultivated. Taryn comments that the garden seems to shine more brilliantly than usual, although Sylvia awkwardly brushes aside the compliment. Just then, an elderly garden spirit appears nearby. Looking around the flourishing garden, he remarks that Sylvia's power is steadily growing, and that her presence is beginning to influence the plants around her. Curious, Sylvia asks him to explain what he means. Before the old spirit can answer, Taryn points out that the plants were never particularly friendly before, yet now they willingly help Sylvia on their own. Sylvia also notes that Lafalea's spirit is far more distinct and powerful than the tiny plant spirits she had encountered in the past. She then asks the elder whether becoming stronger is a good thing. The old spirit shakes his head and explains that power can never be viewed from only one side. Every blessing comes with an equal burden. Even someone who wishes to live a peaceful life may find that impossible once they possess great power. He warns Sylvia that talented people inevitably attract jealousy and enemies. The spirit reminds her that something similar already happened to her 3 years ago. Taryn curiously asks what happened back then. Breaking into a nervous sweat, Sylvia awkwardly dismisses it as nothing more than a minor incident. However, 3 years earlier, nearly every imperial gardener considered Sylvia their greatest rival. They constantly harassed her, forcing her to scrub hateful graffiti from her shop. One day, she overheard 2 gardeners gossiping about her. They claimed that she owned the most profitable flower shop in the capital and spread rumors that she had no morals or sense of shame. Another gardener chimed in, saying that the blue-eyed girl had no respect for her senior colleagues. His companion agreed, confidently declaring that someone like Sylvia would never survive long as an imperial gardener. This time, however, Sylvia refused to remain silent. Standing up to their bullying, she firmly declared that they had no right to damage someone else's shop or threaten her. The men, on the other hand, say that everything they have was earned through blood and sweat. They insist that they never threatened her and only gave her some advice. After flicking Sylvia on the forehead, they leave while complaining that their mood had been ruined and that they could not stand being there any longer. An angry Sylvia has no choice but to watch her abusers walk away, even though she had done nothing wrong. The story then returns to the present, where a beautiful young lady admires the transformed garden. Her servant remarks that the new gardener, despite being young, accomplished all of this because of her exceptional talent. In fact, 3 years ago, Sylvia was disliked simply because of jealousy. When it came to gardening, she was head and shoulders above everyone else. A flashback shows Sylvia staring at a mountain of letters piled on her desk. Confused, she asks the butler what they are. He explains that they are requests from the Duke's wife and her friends, meaning that nearly every noble household in the capital wants to hire her. The news surprises Sylvia greatly. After hearing the story, Taryn immediately realizes why the other gardeners resented her so much. He even suggests that the capital's gardeners may have been losing their livelihoods because clients were choosing Sylvia instead. Sylvia agrees. Although she was naturally happy about her success, she also understood that other gardeners were losing work because of her. Because of that, she completely understood why they hated her. As a result, she changed the way she ran her business, something Taryn had already noticed. One of those changes was closing her shop 3 days a week, while on the remaining days, she accepted only a strictly limited number of orders. Taryn praises Sylvia, saying that she found a fair compromise. Sylvia agrees, explaining that after introducing those changes, the other gardeners finally stopped bothering her, except for the imperial gardeners. Hearing that, Taryn wonders what she could possibly have done to make them hate her so much. Sylvia simply replies that people with inferiority complexes do not need an excuse to do cruel things. Another memory surfaces. As Sylvia opens the door to welcome what she thinks is another customer, she is suddenly hit in the face with a rotten egg. Wiping it from her eyes, she looks down to find offensive flyers and sheets covered in insults scattered across the ground. She admits that the rotten eggs and hateful flyers were only the beginning. Pushing through the crowd that had gathered outside her shop, Sylvia discovers that her store's sign has been smashed to pieces. Although she thinks destroying the sign was childish, what she sees next leaves her completely devastated. She finds her beloved plants brutally destroyed by those who hated her. The plant spirits living within them did not survive either. That is what frightens Sylvia the most. Everywhere she looks, there are signs of abuse inflicted upon her plants. But the nightmare is not over yet. Sylvia also notices a white powder scattered across the ground. Realizing that it is herbicide, she is consumed by overwhelming rage. Sylvia is so furious that she ignores the entire crowd, rushes into her shop, and locks herself inside. Although she puts up a warning sign in front of the store, she knows the bullying will not stop just because of a simple notice. Sadly, Sylvia admits that perhaps she should never have opened her shop in that location. The relentless harassment from the imperial gardeners continued, eventually becoming the final straw. Determined to fight back, she devised a clever way to take revenge for all the trees they had destroyed. Back to the present, Sylvia gently places a hand on one of the emperor's garden trees and quietly says that this is her revenge. Taryn is surprised when he hears the name of the tree, Six-Il tree, as he has never heard of such a species before. Sylvia confirms that the tree truly did not exist before she created it herself. She then casually reveals that the tree is poisonous, causing Taryn to panic and scold her for touching it without hesitation. Sylvia reassures him that simply touching the tree is completely harmless. However, anyone who seriously tries to damage a Six-Il tree will immediately regret it. When the tree is harmed, it releases a poisonous liquid that causes the offender to vomit violently almost instantly. She further explains that the poison also gives the victim a high fever that lasts for 6 full days. According to Sylvia, this was her way of making the imperial gardeners pay for everything they had done to her and her beloved plants. After hearing about the poison's effects, Taryn quickly realizes that the tree's unusual name comes from the 6-day fever it inflicts on anyone who attacks it. Sylvia proudly adds that even when inspectors from the imperial palace investigated the tree, they could not accuse her of any wrongdoing. Instead, Sylvia was the one who filed a complaint against the imperial gardeners for the damage they had caused to her property. She recalls that, although the harassment eventually stopped after the incident, the relationship between her and the imperial gardeners remained strained. Sylvia then imagines the gardeners' reaction when they discover that she has been chosen to organize the upcoming festival. Before she can continue, however, the elderly spirit suddenly warns her to be cautious of more than just humans. Curious, Sylvia asks him to explain what he means. The elder reveals that he knows she has been visiting the imperial palace frequently. Based on what he has observed, he tells her that the very thing she had feared has happened to one of the man-made trees growing in the palace garden. Alarmed by his words, Sylvia immediately wonders if the condition of the artificial tree has begun to deteriorate. Sylvia grabs the elderly spirit by the shoulders and anxiously asks whether the person who created the tree already knows what has happened. The spirit only lowers his head sadly and slowly shakes it, offering no verbal reply. Sylvia then asks if one of the imperial gardeners could have been responsible. However, the answer comes to her before the spirit can respond. Letting out a quiet sigh, she realizes that even if someone from the imperial gardeners was involved, the spirit would never reveal their identity. Biting her nail nervously, Sylvia realizes that she should have prepared purified water in advance. The spirit remains silent for a moment before gently placing his hand on her head and telling her to be careful, because she must take care of herself. After offering those final words of advice, the elderly spirit quietly departs, leaving Sylvia alone with her thoughts. As he walks away, Sylvia softly remarks that the only reason he chose to tell her now is because he no longer has much time left. Left by herself, Sylvia reaches out and places her hand on the troubled tree, almost as if it can feel the pain and worry weighing on her heart. Taryn quietly approaches from behind and does his best to comfort and support her. That evening, Sylvia sits with tears streaming down her face, her hair still soaking wet. Taryn gently combs through her curls and tells her to stop crying because she will only end up with a headache later. Instead of listening, Sylvia simply yells at him to shut up. A moment later, however, her attention shifts to a basket resting on the table behind them. Picking up the letter inside, Sylvia asks where it came from. Taryn explains that someone had slipped it under the door earlier. Since he could not read what it said, he simply placed it on the table for her. When Sylvia opens the letter, she finds a heartfelt message of gratitude accompanied by a child's drawing. Taryn asks if it is a reply from the little girl they helped earlier. Smiling warmly, Sylvia says that she had assumed the little girl was still too young to read or write properly. It seems she had underestimated her. Next to the letter, Sylvia notices a small bottle filled with dried leaves. She wonders if they are tea leaves, but exhaustion suddenly overwhelms her. Deciding she will figure it out after brewing them later, she leaves the bottle on the table and realizes just how tired she is. Taryn tells her that she should at least dry her hair before going to bed. However, seeing how exhausted Sylvia truly is, he simply sighs and decides not to lecture her any further. A little while later, Taryn quietly enters Sylvia's room and gently pulls a blanket over her. Opening her eyes slightly, Sylvia asks why he is not nagging her like he usually does. Taryn smiles faintly and replies that some days do not need any nagging. Sylvia cannot help laughing at his answer. Seeing her laugh, Taryn blushes slightly before awkwardly explaining that she does not have any work tomorrow anyway, so she should simply get a good night's sleep. He then wishes her good night and sweet dreams before quietly leaving the room. A few hours later, Sylvia is already sitting in the Emperor's garden with a mug of tea in her hands. She has been summoned to the Imperial Palace, where she meets with the Crown Prince. Still half asleep, Sylvia asks why His Highness called for her so early. The Crown Prince casually replies that he does not know, then teasingly asks whether he really needs a reason to summon her. Sylvia instinctively replies that she believes a reason is necessary. Realizing whom she is speaking to, she quickly corrects herself, awkwardly saying that what she meant was that she merely wished there were a reason. The ruby-haired prince crosses his legs and remarks that Sylvia is terrible at hiding her emotions. However, he adds that he actually likes that honesty. He then explains that he summoned her for two reasons. The first concerns the preparations for the festival celebrating the founding of the country. Since Sylvia is responsible for organizing it, she needs to decide on the overall concept, and he wants to know how much progress she has made over the past few days. Sylvia looks visibly offended by his words, but the Crown Prince calmly continues. Since he has already invested a considerable amount of money into the project, he believes he has every right to receive a report on the work completed so far. Sylvia complains that, even if that is true, dragging someone out of bed this early is a bit excessive. The red-haired prince calmly replies that he is a busy man, and the person who accepted his money must adjust the schedule of their employer. Realizing there is no point arguing with him, Sylvia quietly turns toward one of the servants and whispers, asking them to come up with an excuse to get her out of there. When Sylvia realizes that her excuse will not work, she honestly admits that she has not even started preparing for the festival. Even so, she confidently assures the Crown Prince that everything will definitely be ready within a week, because the plants will be grown using a rather unusual method. The Crown Prince folds his hands and says that both statements can be true. Sylvia then asks if she may finally hear the second reason he summoned her. The prince smiles and looks away before explaining that, as he mentioned earlier, he is an extremely busy man. He has not even had the opportunity to visit the hillside mansion that Sylvia brought back to life, so he decided to comfort himself by looking at her instead. After all, he says, she resembles those beautiful pink trees so much. After a brief silence, the Crown Prince admits that while they were discussing the preparations for the festival celebrating the founding of the country, another question came to his mind. Looking directly at Sylvia, he asks what the limits of her abilities are. Sylvia looks back at him and realizes that she has never given anyone a clear explanation of her powers. Whether people believe she controlled the earth or water, those who dealt with her could only make guesses. No one actually knew the true extent of her abilities. Since the Crown Prince is clearly convinced that she grows plants through supernatural powers, Sylvia simply asks whether he is ordering her to reveal her abilities. The prince lightly taps the table and replies that it is nothing like that. He merely asked out of curiosity. Sylvia calmly tells him that, in that case, she has no intention of answering. After all, who would willingly reveal such information so easily? Looking at him with slight contempt, she points out that it is unfair to expect complete trust when they do not trust each other equally. In this world, everyone is born with different abilities, but discovering exactly what someone can do is extremely difficult. People with powers rarely reveal either their abilities or their limits. There are many reasons for keeping them secret, but the greatest reason is their own safety. Every ability has weaknesses, and revealing one's powers is the same as revealing one's vulnerabilities. Because of that, there is an unspoken rule that people should never pry too deeply into another person's abilities. If someone chooses to reveal their powers, it means they completely trust the person they are speaking to. The Crown Prince suddenly says a single word, "My eyes." Sylvia looks at him in confusion, unsure what he means. The prince calmly explains that eyes is the name of his ability. Whenever he wishes, he can see the entire capital, all the way to its outermost borders. Sylvia is genuinely shocked. Not only is he the Crown Prince, but he has just revealed his ability so casually. The imperial palace itself is enormous, yet his power allows him to observe the entire capital from there. She cannot help wondering just how extraordinary his ability truly is. After thinking for a moment, Sylvia finally decides to reveal her own ability in return. She explains that she can communicate with plants. Over the years, she has continued developing that ability, allowing it to evolve into something far more versatile than it once was. The ruby-haired prince immediately asks what she means by that and requests an example. Before Sylvia can answer, however, a maid suddenly rushes into the garden. Completely out of breath, she apologizes for interrupting the meeting and reports that an emergency has occurred. Sylvia immediately turns toward her and asks what happened. Rather than speaking aloud, the maid whispers the details into a servant's ear. The servant approaches the table and gently asks Sylvia to remain calm because something has happened at her flower shop. Before the servant can even finish speaking, the Crown Prince activates his ability. Using eyes, he instantly sees the entire scene. Sylvia's flower shop is engulfed in flames. "There has been a fire," the Crown Prince says. At those words, Sylvia feels completely hollow. Her legs give up, and she collapses onto the ground. The Crown Prince immediately rushes to her side, urging Sylvia to calm down and gather herself. He promises that he will dispatch the Imperial Knights to the scene without delay. At that very moment, Terran suddenly materializes beside Sylvia. Without saying a word, he gathers her into his arms and disappears with her in an instant. Watching them vanish, the Crown Prince immediately realizes that the spirit who took Sylvia away could only have been Terran. At that moment, Terran is doing everything in his power to get Sylvia back to her shop as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, the ruby-haired Crown Prince pauses for a moment before realizing that the spirit he had just seen was the one who had been staying by Sylvia's side all this time. Sylvia and Terran struggle to push their way through the panicked crowd. When they finally reach the burning building, Sylvia freezes in horror at the sight before her. People are desperately trying to extinguish the flames with buckets of water, while others shout for even more water to be brought. Amid the chaos, Sylvia hears the desperate cries of the plant spirits. They all call out to her, begging her to save them. Without thinking, she pushes Terran aside. Terran urgently tells her to wait and stop acting recklessly, but Sylvia is already sprinting toward the flames. In her heart, she desperately begs the spirits to hold on just a little longer because she is already there. Suddenly, someone grabs Sylvia by the wrist. She struggles and screams for the person to let go. The one holding her back is none other than Kale. Kale firmly tells her that he cannot let her go because the building is completely engulfed in flames. He refuses to allow her to throw her life away and die in the fire. At those words, Sylvia remembers the day she died in her previous life before awakening in this world. Through tears, she cries out that even if a human dies, they can be reborn. Terran cannot understand what she is talking about. With tears streaming down her face, Sylvia desperately explains that spirits only have one life. Kale suddenly hears the faint cries coming from inside the burning shop and asks whether there are still people trapped inside. Sylvia replies that, even after hearing those voices, if he still tries to stop her, then he cannot even be called human. Without waiting for another response, Sylvia tears herself free and runs straight into the flames. Seeing her disappear into the burning building, Taryn immediately rushes in after her. Kale bites his lip but refuses to stand by and do nothing. Turning toward the crowd, he shouts for everyone's attention before asking whether anyone present possesses water magic. He explains that this is no ordinary fire, because the shop was deliberately set ablaze using fire magic. As Sylvia races through the burning building, she finds the elderly tree spirit waiting for her. Horrified, she begs him to wait just a little longer and promises that she will extinguish the fire no matter what. The spirit gently shakes his head. He tells Sylvia that this is not why he came. Instead, he apologizes for not giving her enough time to prepare and asks her to take care of the others in his place. The elderly spirit gently places a hand on Sylvia's head and smiles warmly. He quietly says that if a miracle ever happens, they will meet again. Before he can finish his sentence, however, the flames completely consume his soul. Sylvia is left in utter despair. She screams that this cannot be happening before collapsing to the ground, desperately trying to gather the few remaining fragments of the spirit. Using every last bit of his remaining strength, the old tree spirit unleashes a brilliant burst of light. Towering rays of light shoot high into the sky, instantly extinguishing the flames. The pillar of light is so enormous that it can be seen from every corner of the capital. In the end, the old tree spirit fades away forever. Although Sylvia's shop itself remains completely unharmed, the entire garden surrounding it is reduced to ashes. Sylvia can no longer hold back her tears. Watching her break down, Taryn feels every bit of her pain. He quietly walks over to her and wraps his arms around her in a comforting embrace. Suddenly, a single drop of magical energy falls onto the ground. The power spreads throughout the entire garden, revitalizing every plant it touches. In an instant, life returns to the scorched earth. Moments later, the Imperial Knights rush into the garden and begin asking where Sylvia is. When Chaos spots her, he immediately asks whether she is all right. Instead of Chaos, however, the Knights are greeted by a breathtaking sight. Sylvia and Taryn are embracing each other in the middle of a lush green garden that has miraculously come back to life. One of the onlookers remarks that he had always believed Sylvia was merely an impatient young gardener. But after witnessing such an incredible miracle, he cannot help wondering if she is actually the goddess of the forest herself. A few days later, Kale states that the person responsible for the arson was clearly targeting Sylvia. Sylvia quietly agrees, saying that it certainly appears that way. She even has an idea of who might be responsible, although she admits they are only suspicions for now. Looking at the bottle of tea leaves on the table, Sylvia asks what Taryn discovered about them. He explains that after reviving the garden, Sylvia slept for 4 entire days. During that time, he investigated everything surrounding the incident, including the mysterious gift. According to Taryn, the tea leaves were poisoned. Had Sylvia brewed and drunk the tea that day, she would have become too weak to escape the fire and would have suffocated in the smoke. Hearing that, Sylvia suddenly realizes something. She immediately snatches the bottle from Taryn's hands. The moment she opens it and smells the leaves, her expression changes completely. "It's La Falea," she says. Taryn looks at her in confusion and asks what she means. Sylvia explains that the tea leaves carry La Falea's scent. Without another word, Sylvia jumps to her feet and declares that she is going to the Imperial Palace because the culprit is there. Taryn asks why she reached that conclusion so suddenly. Sylvia insists that they must end this as quickly as possible and makes it clear that she has no intention of going alone. Taryn naturally replies that he will accompany her because he is her partner. However, when he turns around, he is surprised to find countless plant spirits gathered behind them. Sylvia calmly says that someone dared to attack her in her own garden, and whoever was responsible would have to pay for it. Sometime later, Sylvia arrives at the Imperial Palace. She explains that she has already received permission from the Crown Prince, who instructed everyone not to interfere with her investigation. Turning to one of the servants, Sylvia asks whether all of the Imperial gardeners are under her authority until the festival celebrating the founding of the country is over. The servant quietly whispers whether the Crown Prince truly gave her such authority. Sylvia replies that she assumes he is hiding somewhere nearby, so if anyone sees him, they should simply bring him over. With that, Sylvia enters the room where the Imperial gardeners have gathered. She slowly walks past each gardener, carefully examining every one of them. When she reaches the last person, however, she realizes that someone is missing. Turning toward the servants, Sylvia asks whether she had not clearly ordered everyone to attend. One of the gardeners inwardly scoffs, thinking that this petty girl may have gained the crown prince's support, but that certainly does not make her their superior. He arrogantly replies that they can simply pass along anything important to the person who is absent. If Sylvia has something to say, he suggests she should stop wasting everyone's time and get straight to the point. Shocked by his disrespect, Sylvia walks right up to him and calmly asks whether he would dare answer in the same manner if the person standing before him were the crown prince himself. Sylvia glares coldly at the gardener standing before her. Until recently, she had been nothing more than the owner of a small flower shop, someone who stood worlds apart from the imperial gardeners. However, as long as she was carrying out the crown prince's orders, her authority carried the same weight as His Highness's. She points directly at one of the gardeners. Startled, he asks what she wants but immediately corrects his tone. Sylvia orders him to bring the missing gardener to her at once. A few moments later, the plant spirits quietly inform Sylvia that the person is approaching. Soon afterward, the missing gardener finally enters the room. The moment Sylvia sees her, she notices that the lingering scent has still not disappeared. It is the unmistakable smell of smoke. Just then, a burgundy-haired woman walks into the room. As Sylvia had suspected all along, the missing gardener is the culprit. Sylvia says that she never imagined the criminal would be caught so easily. The woman, however, pretends not to understand what she is talking about. Without hesitation, Sylvia grabs her by the collar and demands to know whether she truly thinks everyone is so foolish. She then asks what was going through her mind as she watched the garden burn. The red-haired woman's eyes narrow slightly at the accusation, but she quickly puts on an innocent expression and insists that she has no idea what Sylvia is talking about. Sylvia lets go of her collar and calmly replies that, if she truly does not understand, then she will explain everything. Activating her power, Sylvia summons the plant spirits. One after another, they appear in the air, leaving every imperial gardener staring in complete shock. None of them understand where the spirits came from. Sylvia explains that the red-haired woman manipulated the little girl into obtaining Laphalea, later sent poisoned tea containing Laphalea's paralytic toxin to Sylvia's home, and finally set the garden on fire. Looking directly into the woman's eyes, Sylvia asks whether she enjoyed listening to those innocent spirits scream in pain as they burned. The red-haired woman immediately denies everything and asks what Sylvia is talking about. The other gardeners begin exchanging uneasy glances. One of them hesitantly asks whether Susan really committed such a crime. Susan quickly denies it, insisting that she would never do something like that. At that moment, a green-haired fairy steps forward and says that she saw Susan with her own eyes that day. She explains that when she woke up peacefully that morning, the first thing she saw was Susan standing there with flames burning in her hands. The fairy firmly declares that Susan's lies will not fool her. Susan is left speechless. She stares in horror, unable to think of a single response. Sylvia slowly walks up to her and calmly declares that the judgment does not come from her alone. It is the decision of every plant spirit throughout the capital. From this day forward, no plant Susan attempts to grow will ever obey her again. Every flower, tree, and seed that takes root under her care will reject her. Even medicinal herbs will become poisonous if she tries to use them. This is the verdict of the plant spirits. Terrified, Susan collapses to the floor, clutching her head in despair. Sylvia looks down at her without the slightest trace of sympathy, before turning to face the rest of the imperial gardeners. She calmly tells them that if anyone else is dissatisfied with the way she does her job, they are welcome to step forward and say it directly to her face. Not a single person moves. Seeing only silence, Sylvia smiles faintly and says that, since no one has anything to say, they should all get back to work. Feeling completely exhausted, Sylvia lies down on her bed. Although the bed is soft and comfortable, she cannot shake the feeling that none of it truly belongs to her. Several days have passed since the incident. Even after being exposed as the culprit, the imperial gardener Susan continued to deny any involvement in the fire until the very end. However, not long afterward, while eating a salad, Susan suddenly became violently ill. Horrified, she rushed outside to the nearby bushes. As Sylvia's words echoed in her mind, she began to fear that the curse might actually be real. When Susan looked down at her hand, she saw that every plant beneath it had turned black. She immediately stumbled backward in terror, finally convinced that the judgment of the plant spirits was real. Soon afterward, Susan personally approached Sylvia with a large amount of monetary compensation. Sylvia accepted the payment, but she calmly explained that, even if Susan begged on her knees, the decision no longer rested with her. The judgment had been passed by the plant spirits. Besides, Susan had taken the lives of the old tree spirit and La Falea. Turning away from her, Sylvia simply remarked that what happened next was no longer her concern. Either way, Susan would have to live with the consequences of her actions. Later that night, Sylvia tosses and turns in bed, unable to fall asleep. She wonders whether this strange feeling is simply because her shop is currently being renovated. In the end, however, she reminds herself that at least it has given her the opportunity to stay at the Imperial Palace for a while. Just then, something outside catches Sylvia's attention. She immediately gets out of bed, walks to the window, and gazes toward the palace garden. A strange energy seems to be coming from somewhere within it. Curious, Sylvia heads outside. As she walks through the garden, she wonders if what she sensed was another spirit. Several little plant spirits fly over to greet her and happily ask whether she has come to take care of them. Smiling, Sylvia replies that even she cannot spend every waking moment working. She continues searching through the garden until one of the trees suddenly speaks to her. It asks whether she is looking for something before suggesting that she climb up and look around from above. Sylvia realizes that it might actually be a good idea. She climbs the tree, but just as she reaches the top, her dress catches on one of the branches. Losing her balance, she begins falling backward. Frightened, Sylvia squeezes her eyes shut. When she opens them again, she realizes that she is safely resting in someone's arms. Looking up in confusion, she sees Kale. Concerned, Kale asks whether she is all right. Still trying to understand what just happened, Sylvia stares at him for a moment before quickly regaining her composure. Embarrassed, she assures him that she is perfectly fine. She immediately jumps out of his arms and brushes the dust from her dress. Watching her, Kale cannot help remembering everything that happened during the fire. He gently asks whether Sylvia is feeling any better after everything she went through. Confused, Sylvia asks what he means. Kale explains that he is referring to the incident involving the garden, and reminds her that her flower shop also suffered significant damage during the fire. Sylvia replies that, fortunately, the flames never reached the inside of the shop. Repairs have already begun, thanks to the compensation she received. She then smiles faintly and adds that, thanks to the Crown Prince's generosity, she has been able to stay at the Imperial Palace while the renovations are underway. Sylvia did not know where she was supposed to stay after the fire. The Crown Prince simply turned to Glenn and ordered him to prepare everything for her. Without hesitation, the servant obeyed his master's command. Surprised, Sylvia asked whether he was not even going to ask for her opinion on the matter. His Highness merely looked at her and asked whether that was something he should concern himself with. Those words left Sylvia completely speechless. For a moment, she stood there in stunned silence before anger suddenly overwhelmed her. She shouted that, even if members of the imperial family had always lived that way, they could not simply ignore everyone else's opinions. No matter who they were, they had no right to be so deaf to the thoughts of others. Remembering the exchange now, Sylvia lets out a quiet sigh and tells Kale that everything is fine now. She explains that the birth and passing of spirits are simply part of nature's providence. Kale asks whether she means that the death of a tree spirit is the same as the death of a human being. Looking at the tiny fairy resting on his shoulder, Sylvia quietly replies that she believes it is exactly like that. She then adds that, in some ways, the death of a spirit may be even more tragic than the passing of a person. Kale gently kneels before Sylvia and takes her hand in his. Smiling warmly, he reminds her that he is still waiting for her answer regarding his invitation to the festival. A moment later, he rises to his feet and says that he is simply happy to see that she is doing well. After wishing her well, Kale bids her farewell and quietly leaves. The moment he is gone, several little fairies gather around Sylvia. They excitedly ask whether Kale is the person who likes her and whether he is her lover. Flustered, Sylvia hurriedly denies everything. Trying to change the subject, she turns away and says that she still has to find what she has been searching for. One of the fairies asks what exactly she is looking for. Sylvia explains that she has been sensing a strange presence nearby. It feels like the aura of a spirit, but something about it is dark and unnatural. The fairies exchange uneasy glances before one of them quietly speaks up. It tells Sylvia that the presence could belong to a spirit that devours human souls. The fairy explains that, Some time ago, a high-ranking member of the imperial family touched a certain tree. Ever since then, he has remained unconscious. The fairy also mentions that the crown prince, who has always been kind to Sylvia, visits his younger brother every single day. Sylvia immediately realizes that the prince's younger brother was the victim. Alarmed, she asks when the incident happened. One of the fairies replies that it occurred about a month ago. According to the spirits, he should have died immediately. However, thanks to using his special ability, he somehow managed to survive. Instead of allowing his soul to be consumed, he separated it from his body and escaped before the spirit could devour it. Sylvia is stunned by the revelation. She finally understands that the elderly tree spirit's warning had been about this very incident. Unsure of what to do next, Sylvia wonders how she is supposed to find such a dangerous tree. Lost in thought, she continues walking through the garden. Without paying attention to where she is going, she suddenly walks straight into someone and falls to the ground. Looking up, she finds herself staring at the crown prince. The ruby-haired prince asks why she is wandering around such a secluded place by herself. Sylvia quickly greets His Highness. He remarks that it seems she has been searching for something. Startled, Sylvia immediately asks what he means. She quickly improvises an excuse, claiming that she is looking for inspiration for the festival celebrating the founding of the country, because they need unusual ideas for the decorations. The crown prince simply laughs. He remarks that he never realized Sylvia was motivated enough to volunteer for overtime without asking for additional pay. Realizing that she has been completely caught, Sylvia gives up on her excuse and decides to tell him the truth. She quietly admits that she has been sensing a strange energy somewhere nearby. The crown prince steps closer and calmly asks her to explain exactly what she means by that strange energy. The crown prince gently grabs Sylvia's hand and asks whether she has discovered something or if she is simply following her intuition. Before she can answer, however, his attention is drawn elsewhere. To his surprise, the crown prince can suddenly see the fairies. One of them flies up to him and cheerfully remarks that it seems this man can finally see them now. Sylvia explains that the spirits of the surrounding plants are now visible before His Highness. The ruby-haired prince remembers what she had told him earlier about her ability. Letting go of her hand, he listens as Sylvia explains that she previously could only hear the voices of plants. However, her power has grown stronger, allowing her to interact with the spirits in ways she never could before. The crown prince remarks that her ability is much closer to shamanism than ordinary gardening. He explains that a shaman is someone capable of communicating with spirits, rather than simply cultivating plants. After thinking quietly for a moment, the crown prince turns towards Sylvia and tells her to follow him because there is somewhere they need to go. As they walk deeper into the forest, Sylvia asks where they are heading. His Highness calmly replies that they are making their way toward the garden. Sylvia becomes increasingly confused. The strange energy she has been sensing feels far darker than the presence of ordinary spirits. Remembering the ominous aura, Sylvia suddenly grabs the crown prince's hand and asks him to stop. When he turns around, she asks whether the source of that energy is somewhere ahead. She then tells him that, if it is, she will continue alone. The ruby-haired prince immediately asks why. Sylvia explains that if he approaches it, his body could be placed in danger. She says that she can feel something dark and unnaturally twisted ahead. If it truly is a spirit, however, she believes she may be able to examine its condition herself. The crown prince stops walking and quietly considers her words. Running a hand through his hair, he eventually agrees to let her proceed alone, saying that he will remain behind and keep watch over her from a safe distance. As Sylvia steps into the garden, she immediately notices how unnaturally quiet everything is. The silence unsettles her because she can barely hear the voices of the surrounding spirits. An uneasy feeling creeps over her as she slowly looks around. Just as she begins to turn back, she suddenly hears someone calling her name. It is Terran's voice. He quickly catches up to Sylvia and firmly tells her not to go any farther. Surprised to see him there, Sylvia asks why he came instead of staying behind and reading his book. Terran walks straight up to her and replies that he should be asking her the same question. When Sylvia failed to return for such a long time, he became worried that she had gotten lost, so he came looking for her. Sylvia insists that she is perfectly fine and not lost at all. Even so, she tells Terran that he should stay away from this place as well. She explains that the tree ahead is releasing an overwhelming amount of resentment. Before Sylvia can finish her warning, Terran immediately steps in front of her, shielding her with his body. Looking directly at her, he firmly tells her not to go any farther because it is simply too dangerous. Without saying another word, Taryn leads Sylvia to the palace. As they walk through the quiet halls, Sylvia looks around and realizes that there is not a single person in sight. Eventually, they stop in front of a pair of large doors. Taryn slowly pushes them open, and the moment they do, Sylvia feels an eerie energy pouring out from the room. In the center of the room lies a young man on a bed. One of his hands has turned completely black. Taryn quietly tells Sylvia that if she gets any closer to that tree, the same thing could happen to her. Sylvia slowly approaches the bed and is stunned to see that the unconscious young man looks almost identical to Taryn. Watching her reaction, Taryn explains that this is exactly what could happen if she goes near the tree. He asks whether, after seeing this, she still intends to continue. He quietly adds that, although Sylvia is an exceptionally talented gardener, he doubts that even she can do anything about such a curse. Silence fills the room. Taryn looks at Sylvia before placing a hand against his forehead. He quietly admits that he always intended to tell her the truth one day. Before he can continue, Sylvia suddenly interrupts him. "So it was you," she says. "You were that mysterious prince." She explains that she never actually saw the tree itself, yet even from a distance, she could sense someone's presence near it. Somehow, Taryn had managed to touch it. Taryn asks whether she is surprised. Instead of answering, Sylvia asks what he is really trying to say. He then quietly asks whether she feels betrayed because he hid the fact that he is a prince. Before he can finish, Sylvia interrupts him once again. She asks whether he is referring to the fact that he kept his identity a secret. Taryn silently looks away. Sylvia calmly replies that she dislikes making life more complicated than it needs to be. She asks whether he has ever tried to harm her because she cannot remember a single time when he did. Since he never hurt her, she sees no reason to make an issue out of his secret. She admits that she always felt he was a little different from other spirits, but she simply assumed there had to be a reason for it. Taryn quietly asks whether she truly feels that way, even after learning the truth. Sylvia smiles faintly before explaining that, now that she knows everything, she simply finds the situation rather strange. Normally, if someone is cursed by a tree, they would seek out a healer, not a gardener. Taryn lowers his head without saying a word. Turning toward him with a reassuring smile, Sylvia simply asks where the tree is. Taryn walks over to the window and slowly pulls back the curtains. The moment Sylvia looks outside, she immediately sees the source of the dark energy she has been sensing. As she focuses her gaze, she notices a female spirit floating near the tree, surrounded by an ominous aura of darkness. Sylvia is left speechless by the sight. The spirit woman slowly floats closer and looks directly at Sylvia. So she says, "Someone has come again." Tilting her head slightly, she then asks if she is another foolish girl. Sylvia looks at the mysterious woman and calmly states that she is not a spirit. The woman slowly floats closer and asks whether Sylvia can actually see her. Smiling ominously, she remarks that it does not matter whether she is a spirit or a demon, because Sylvia will be dead soon anyway. She declares that she came out today to personally greet her newest guest. Once she finishes dealing with the prince, Sylvia will be next. Sylvia clenches her teeth before turning toward Taryn. She urgently tells him that they need to warn everyone, because this demon is clearly trying to lure more people to the tree and devour their souls. Without wasting another second, the two of them leave the room. As Sylvia lets out a deep sigh, she raises her head and suddenly notices the crown prince standing nearby. Only then does everything finally click. If Taryn is a prince, then he and the crown prince are brothers. Now Sylvia understands why they always looked so alike. She quickly tells His Highness that the creature is inside, but before she can finish, the crown prince interrupts her and asks whether she saw Taryn in there. Taryn is visibly surprised. The crown prince walks over to his younger brother and quietly asks how he found out the truth. He explains that he realized Taryn's disguise had been exposed during the fire at Sylvia's flower shop. Looking back now, he believes it was probably inevitable that Taryn and Sylvia would eventually meet. After a brief silence, the crown prince turns towards Sylvia. Once she gathers herself, he asks whether she believes the curse can be broken. Sylvia remembers seeing Taryn lying unconscious beside that terrifying tree and quietly replies that there is still a chance. The crown prince lets out a quiet sigh before telling her to name her price. He promises that he will pay whatever amount she asks. Sylvia immediately shakes her head. She tells him that she has no intention of accepting any money. Taryn looks at her in complete surprise. Smiling gently, Sylvia explains that she simply cannot stand by and watch her friend die. Even if the crown prince had ordered her to solve the problem without offering any reward, she still would have accepted. She tells them that she does not need anything in return. After thinking for a moment, however, Sylvia admits that she cannot solve the problem immediately. She explains that she will need some time, so His Highness must wait until after the festival celebrating the founding of the country. She then asks whether she may use the Imperial Palace's library for her research. Sometime later, Sylvia is surrounded by stacks of books inside the palace library. Holding her aching head, she groans that it feels as though she is taking a mathematics exam all over again. Completely exhausted, she collapses face first onto the table. Taryn quietly places a mug of tea beside her and tells her that she should take a break and get some rest. Sylvia immediately sits upright and asks who she is working so hard for. Halfway through her complaint, she suddenly remembers that Taryn is actually a prince and awkwardly begins addressing him more formally. Taryn simply smiles. He tells Sylvia to keep speaking to him the same way she always has, because she already talks to his older brother without any hesitation. Sylvia becomes even more embarrassed, remembering how casually she had always spoken to him. She wonders how she can continue addressing a prince so informally now that she knows the truth. Taryn reassures her that he truly does not care. As long as it is not an official occasion, he wants her to treat him exactly as she always has. The two of them then turn toward the crown prince. Noticing them staring at him, the ruby-haired prince jokingly asks whether he has somehow become the villain of the story. He casually tells Taryn to do whatever he wants before teasing that, according to his younger brother, Sylvia is now his best friend. Taryn quietly admits that his older brother was the one who said that. He then turns back to Sylvia and asks whether she discovered anything useful. Sylvia shakes her head. She explains that this is all spirit's work, so maybe she should ask a spirit herself. Taryn asks whether she already has someone in mind. Sylvia nods and explains that one of her friends is a shaman who formed a contract with the spirit of water. Since abilities like hers are extremely rare, she thinks Taryn may have already heard of her. She adds that the woman comes from the Jelban Empire. Hearing that description, Taryn immediately asks if she is talking about Ubrin. Sylvia nods and says that, in that case, Taryn really does know Ubrin. Taryn replies that shamanism is an extremely rare ability. As far as he knows, there is only one shaman in the entire Jelban Empire. Sylvia smiles and remarks that he must have studied quite hard to know so much about a foreign country. She explains that Ubrin is a famous figure in the Jelban Empire who abandoned her noble title and now works as part of a mercenary unit. However, Sylvia admits that Ubrin is most likely very busy, so there is no guarantee she will travel such a long distance just because Sylvia asks for her help. Lowering her head, Sylvia casually says that, to her, Ubrin is simply a stalker. She then remembers all the times Ubrin followed her around. Sylvia confidently declares that, if Ubrin claims she is too busy to come, she will simply go after her herself and drag her back. Picking up a sheet of paper, Sylvia stares at it for a moment, unsure how she should write the letter. Taryn smiles as he watches her write. However, the moment he reads what she has written, his expression freezes in complete disbelief. The letter simply begins with a greeting before stating that Sylvia has business with Ubrin. It then bluntly says that, if Ubrin claims she is too busy to come, she will no longer be alive. After finishing the letter, Sylvia stands up and starts preparing purified water for Ubrin's arrival. Taryn, meanwhile, continues staring at the ink-stained letter in complete shock. As Sylvia walks past him, she casually pats him on the back before leaving the room. Watching her disappear, Taryn lets out a quiet sigh. He instinctively places a hand on the spot where Sylvia touched him, before realizing what he is doing, causing him to blush slightly. A few days later, Sylvia walks through the streets carrying a heavy basket filled with glass jars. Before she can go much farther, someone gently takes the basket from her hands. Looking up, she sees Kale. Curious, Kale asks what she is carrying and where she is planning to take all those jars. As they continue walking together, Sylvia explains that the jars contain purified water. She is on her way to deliver them to the Imperial Palace. Kale asks what purified water actually is. Sylvia tells him that he can think of it as a special supplement needed by one particular tree. Kale assumes that the task must have come directly from the Crown Prince. He then asks whether the preparations for the festival celebrating the founding of the country are going well. Hearing that, Sylvia immediately remembers both the festival and Kale's invitation to spend it with him. She begins answering his question, but Kale gently interrupts her. He reassures Sylvia that he has no intention of rushing her for an answer. She should take all the time she needs before making her decision. By the time Kale looks up, they have already arrived at the palace gates. He carefully places the basket of jars on the ground before wishing Sylvia a pleasant day and quietly taking his leave. Taran silently watches Kale walk away, narrowing his eyes slightly. Noticing his expression, Sylvia remarks that something still feels rather strange. Taran asks what she means. Sylvia explains that Kale is obviously an ordinary human. Even so, when she was standing beside him, she sensed an oddly familiar presence. Taran asks what kind of familiar presence she is talking about. Sylvia replies that she only encountered that energy recently, yet it somehow feels like she has sensed something similar before. As Taran carefully thinks about her words, he suddenly remembers the dark energy surrounding the cursed tree. Quickly changing the subject, he says that the important thing now is the place they are about to visit. Sylvia laughs softly and agrees, reminding him that they are, after all, standing inside his palace. Once Sylvia enters the palace grounds, she uncorks one of the bottles of purified water. The purified water immediately begins drawing the surrounding dark energy into the bottle, trapping it inside the glass. Taran watches the scene in complete astonishment. He asks whether every one of those bottles contains purified water. Sylvia calmly opens another bottle and smiles. "An eye for an eye," she says. "A tooth for a tooth." Sylvia places the jars of purified water all around the area, allowing them to gradually cleanse the poisonous energy. The purifying barrier even spreads around the cursed tree itself. Watching the scene unfold, Sylvia notices that the wooden woman trapped within the tree cannot cross the barrier surrounding it. Sylvia explains that, although the problem has not been completely solved, the barrier will at least buy them some time. The only problem is that they are inside the imperial palace. Taran asks what is so concerning about that, and Sylvia explains that the spirit of the rotten tree is extremely powerful and may attack them through other means, as there are countless opportunities to do so within the palace. Taran asks what other methods the spirit could use and requests an example. Instead of answering, Sylvia simply places a finger against her lips and quietly tells him they should leave quickly. She explains that the purified water will only function as a barrier for a limited time, and until then, she wants to make sure that no one comes anywhere near this place. As Sylvia walks away, she hopes she can prevent any unnecessary commotion from breaking out. Behind her, the spirit of the rotten tree repeatedly tries to force her way through the barrier. However, the moment she touches it, her wooden fingers immediately begin turning black. The spirit curses Sylvia, calling her a damned gardener. She mockingly asks whether Sylvia truly believes such petty tricks will change anything, because she has far more trump cards than Sylvia could ever imagine. Just then, a small white mouse scurries past. The wooden woman notices it immediately and releases a stream of dark energy toward the tiny animal. As soon as the mouse inhales it, its eyes glow a sinister red. After sniffing the air for a moment, it darts away, now completely under the spirit's control. Elsewhere in the palace, a maid walks peacefully through the corridors, carrying a basket of supplies. Completely unaware of the danger, she has no idea that the same white mouse is hiding just behind a nearby door, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As the maid continues walking, the rodent suddenly leaps out from its hiding place. Hearing the noise, she turns around, only to find a rat charging toward her. Startled, she screams and drops the basket she is carrying. At that exact moment, the door behind her swings open, and a white shirt is blown outside by the wind. The maid stares at it in surprise before trying to grab it. However, no matter how far she reaches, she cannot catch it. A short while later, the maid returns carrying a lantern and begins searching through the garden for the missing shirt. Muttering to herself about her terrible luck, she eventually notices the shirt lying in the grass. As she bends down to pick it up, she suddenly spots a glass bottle nearby. Curious, she picks it up and wonders what it is and how it ended up in the garden. Hidden nearby, the same white rat silently watches her every movement. A moment later, it suddenly leaps straight toward the frightened maid. Terrified by the rat, the maid instinctively throws the bottle from her hands. It crashes onto the ground and shatters into countless pieces, releasing the dark energy trapped inside. The rat immediately runs away, while the maid's dress becomes completely stained by the spreading dark energy. Moments later, the wooden woman from the rotten tree slowly emerges before her. The maid stares at the terrifying figure in horror, before letting out a terrified scream. The next morning, Sylvia is peacefully asleep when someone begins pounding loudly on her front door. One of the Imperial Knights repeatedly shouts for her to open it. Still half asleep, Sylvia walks downstairs, grumbling about what time it could possibly be, and wondering who would be making such a racket so early in the morning. After finally returning home, all she wanted was a good night's sleep. Standing before the door, Sylvia calls out that she is currently busy preparing for the festival, celebrating the founding of the country, and will not be accepting any regular orders for a while. The moment she opens the door, however, the tip of a spear is pressed against her throat. Looking up in shock, Sylvia sees a group of Imperial Knights standing outside. Among them is the same purple-haired knight, Kale. Confused, Sylvia asks why they are doing this. Instead of answering, one of the knights coldly declares that this is exactly what should happen to a shameless criminal who ruins someone's life. He immediately orders the others to arrest her. Sylvia protests, asking what they are talking about, because she has never plunged anyone into an eternal sleep. She repeatedly demands an explanation, but no one answers her. Instead, the knights forcibly drag her into a prison cart. Desperate, Sylvia tells them to summon His Highness the Crown Prince because he can prove her innocence. One of the guards scoffs and asks how an ordinary commoner could dare demand the presence of a royal prince. He explains that the Crown Prince is currently away from the capital on official state business. Sylvia insists that someone at least explain why she has been arrested, because she still has no idea what crime she supposedly committed. Kale steps closer before leaning down toward her. He quietly admits that he does not believe Sylvia actually knows what happened. Lightly tapping her forehead, he reminds her that everyone saw her enter the Imperial Palace the previous day, carrying several mysterious bottles inside a basket. Sylvia asks what could possibly be wrong with the bottles. The knight explains that someone died in the palace garden. A maid was discovered lying lifeless beside one of the shattered bottles, and her entire body had turned completely black. Hearing that, Sylvia freezes in shock. Barely able to believe it, she quietly asks whether someone truly died. The knight continues by explaining that her body had blackened in exactly the same way as the mysterious mark covering the prince's hand. Before he can finish, Sylvia suddenly realizes what he is implying. She quietly says that they are accusing her of attempting to murder a member of the imperial family. The guard nods and asks whether she finally understands how serious her situation truly is. He explains that this is no longer merely a case of someone falling into an eternal sleep. The matter will likely even reach the ears of His Imperial Majesty himself. Inside her mind, Sylvia curses the rotten tree. Taking a deep breath, she forces herself to calm down. She knows that an accusation this severe could easily result in her execution. The only people who know what truly happened that day are the Crown Prince, Taryn, and Sylvia herself. Since the Crown Prince is away on state business, only one person remains who can clear her name, Taryn. Unlike the maid, Taryn survived after touching the cursed tree, even though the poison spread across his entire hand after only a single touch. Now, however, the rotten wooden woman has effortlessly claimed another victim. Silently, Sylvia prays that Taryn does not do anything reckless out of desperation. At that very moment, one of Taryn's fingers suddenly twitches. A maid quietly enters his room, carrying a fresh bouquet of flowers. Looking at the wilted flowers already sitting in the vase, she sighs and replaces them with fresh ones. As she finishes arranging them, she sadly remarks that they have withered again. Feeling sorry for the unconscious prince, she quietly wonders what kind of illness could possibly have afflicted him. Just as she turns around, she suddenly sees Taryn sitting upright. The maid lets out a terrified scream. Ignoring her panic, Taryn calmly asks whether His Imperial Majesty is currently in the main palace. He then quietly declares that he wishes to request an audience with the Emperor. The maid stares at Taryn in complete shock, unable to understand what she is seeing. Before she can even ask another question, she immediately rushes out of the room to notify everyone, faithfully carrying out her master's wishes. Taryn understands exactly why he is able to appear before others now. As long as he remains connected to Sylvia through the strand of her hair, people are finally able to see him. Earlier that morning, he had searched through piles of trash to find one of Sylvia's hairs. Although digging through garbage was far from pleasant, he had never felt luckier than he did that day when he finally found one. Moments later, loud voices echo through the hallway outside. One of the palace servants asks His Highness why he has suddenly come there, but before anyone can stop him, the Emperor bursts into the room. Calling out his son's name, the Emperor says he was informed that Taryn had finally regained consciousness. Looking at him in disbelief, he asks what exactly is happening. The Emperor is especially confused because he can clearly see two people standing before him. Without hesitation, Taryn drops to one knee before his father. He respectfully asks the emperor to dismiss everyone else because there is something important he must explain. He adds that the matter concerns a young woman who has been imprisoned despite being completely innocent. After listening to everything, the emperor quietly sits down in a chair. Summarizing Terran's explanation, he says that the girl named Sylvia only came to the imperial palace to help him and bears absolutely no responsibility for what happened. Terran immediately confirms that every word is true. Even so, the emperor admits that he still has many unanswered questions. He points out that Terran remained unconscious for a long time, making it difficult for others to accept testimony from someone who had only just awakened. Terran tries to explain further, but the emperor gently stops him. He says that he has no reason to believe his son is lying. However, he is far more concerned about the condition Terran is currently in. The emperor quietly suggests that this may be the consequence of Terran finally revealing the true nature of the extraordinary ability he possessed all along. After a moment of silence, the emperor says he understands what Terran is asking of him. He promises that he will order Sylvia's release. However, he explains that it will still take 2 or 3 days to create a convincing reason for such a sudden decision. Terran accepts this without complaint. The emperor agrees to do everything within his power, but once everything is over, Terran must publicly provide an explanation that will satisfy everyone. The emperor asks whether he understands. Terran respectfully bows his head and promises that he will. 2 days later, numerous investigators and scholars have gathered at the scene of the crime. Several knights inform one of their colleagues that the investigation has been completed and that they can handle the remaining work themselves. The knight nods before saying that, in that case, he will go speak with the suspect. He unlocks the entrance to the dark underground prison and slowly walks down the cold stone staircase. Quietly cursing the gloomy dungeon, he admits to himself that every visit sends chills down his spine. When he finally reaches Sylvia's cell, he removes a set of keys from his belt. Watching him silently, Sylvia wonders what fate now awaits her. The knight unlocks the cell door and calmly tells her to come out, because her release has been ordered by His Imperial Majesty. A short while later, Sylvia finally steps outside the prison, breathing heavily as she takes in the fresh air. Terran immediately approaches her and gently suggests that she should rest before doing anything else. Sylvia shakes her head without hesitation. She asks whether she really has time to relax now. She points out that she has already spent 2 entire days locked inside a prison, losing the precious time she had set aside to prepare for the festival. She reminds Terran that she accepted a payment of 1,000 gold coins for this work. On top of that, the Crown Prince will soon return to the capital. Determined not to waste another moment, Sylvia declares that she is going back to work immediately. Terran starts to object, but Sylvia quickly cuts him off. She tells him that she does not want to hear any excuses. Then she turns around and points toward the group of Imperial gardeners nearby. With a sigh, Sylvia remarks that those people have been glaring at her with nothing but hostility ever since she arrived. One of the gardeners approaches Sylvia and asks whether Miss Sylvia is really in her right mind. Sylvia turns toward her and calmly asks what she means. The woman points at the rows of empty flower pots and asks what they are supposed to be. She then questions whether Sylvia is trying to get every Imperial gardener fired. As several people walk past the empty pots, one of them remarks that the festival parade is supposed to pass through this street. Another comments that this year's festival, celebrating the founding of the country, looks as though it will be rather plain. Hearing their complaints, Sylvia lets out a sigh. She casually remarks that a sparrow could never understand the grand plans of a heron. Waving her hand dismissively, she says there is no point wasting energy arguing. Instead, she tells the gardeners to stop picking unnecessary fights and focus on their work. The woman angrily demands to know what Sylvia just said. Grinding her teeth, she complains that Sylvia has been entrusted with the most important responsibility, yet she is behaving so carelessly. She declares that Sylvia's attitude is becoming completely infuriating. Finally losing her patience, Sylvia folds her arms across her chest and walks toward the woman. The gardener instinctively takes a small step back before nervously asking what Sylvia intends to do. She anxiously wonders whether Sylvia is about to use her mysterious powers to prevent her from ever eating fruits and vegetables again, or perhaps even have her expelled from the Imperial Palace. Sylvia simply walks closer and calmly tells her to listen carefully. She explains that what happened to Susan, or whatever her name was, had nothing to do with her. The decision to prevent Susan from eating plants or their fruits was made entirely by the spirits. As for the festival, Sylvia tells the gardeners that they will soon witness the results with their own eyes. Perhaps they will even be surprised. She reminds them that she is doing her own job properly, so they should stop interfering and instead focus on completing the tasks assigned to them. Just then, someone suddenly rushes over while repeatedly apologizing for the interruption. The man, covered in dirt and smelling strongly of sweat, hurriedly asks whether Sylvia has 10 white oak seedlings available. Sylvia replies that, as he should already know, white oak seedlings are quite expensive. Ignoring the warning, the man simply asks how much they will cost. Sylvia answers that each seedling is worth 1 gold coin. Without hesitation, the man agrees to the price, and the two complete the transaction. As Sylvia happily counts the gold coins, Taryn remarks that she certainly seems incredibly busy lately. Curious, he asks what all these customers suddenly want. Sylvia explains that news of how she used her abilities during the recent fire has spread throughout the capital. Now, with the festival just around the corner, people keep flooding her shop with orders. Even though she intentionally raised her prices, she has already received more than 20 orders today alone. Taryn asks whether she plans to spend the entire festival preparation period doing nothing but selling plants. Sylvia simply waves her hand dismissively. She reminds him that she also has to prepare a plan for dealing with the corrupted spirit. Letting out another tired sigh, she admits that there is simply too much to do, and she honestly has no idea how she will manage everything. Not long ago, the Crown Prince had summoned Sylvia to the palace. He asked whether she had made any progress with the preparations for the festival. Sylvia could only force an awkward smile because she had absolutely nothing to report. The ruby-haired prince stood from his seat and reminded her that, although she happened to be Taryn's friend, that alone was the only reason he was willing to place his trust in her. Remembering that conversation, Sylvia jokes that it felt exactly like being scolded by an employer, despite having done nothing wrong. Suddenly, she begins coughing. Seeing this, the purple-haired knight asks whether she is really feeling all right. Sylvia simply reassures him that she is perfectly fine. Just then, one of the imperial gardeners approaches and informs Miss Sylvia that all the preparations she requested have finally been completed. Following her instructions, they have placed rows of flower pots filled with sprouts along the entire parade route. Realizing that only one final step remains, Sylvia quietly gathers her strength. Using her ability, she calls out to the plants, asking them to hear her voice and grow. She gently asks them to bloom for everyone awaiting this celebration, and to decorate the holiday with the brilliance of golden flowers. As Sylvia continues channeling her power, flowers instantly burst into bloom across the entire street. The imperial gardeners stand frozen in complete disbelief. Not a single one of them can find the words to describe the miraculous sight unfolding before their eyes. The citizens watching nearby are equally astonished, as countless flowers blossom in the blink of an eye. Among everyone present, however, only Taryn looks worried. Seeing how much power Sylvia has just used, he quietly asks whether she has exhausted herself by doing too much. Sylvia slowly lowers herself to the ground before gathering all of her power into a single stream. A moment later, everyone attending the festival witnesses a breathtaking spectacle resembling fireworks erupting across the sky. As the brilliant lights fade, countless flowers begin drifting down over the entire festival grounds like colorful rain. Even the imperial gardeners are left completely speechless by the unbelievable sight unfolding before them. Breathing heavily, Sylvia quietly says that she has finally done everything she was supposed to do. Although she feels her body growing weaker with every passing second, she still insists that she fulfilled her duty properly. The next moment, however, all the strength leaves her body, and Sylvia collapses onto the ground after exhausting too much of her magical power. Kale immediately rushes over and desperately calls out Sylvia's name. Gently lifting her head onto his lap, he places a hand against her forehead. The instant he touches her skin, his expression changes to one of horror. He quietly realizes that Sylvia is burning with a dangerously high fever. At the same time, another thought flashes through his mind. She still has not given him her answer about spending the festival together. Everything begins spinning before Sylvia's eyes as her consciousness slowly fades. Nearby, one of the knights announces that the parade is about to begin. Watching Sylvia with obvious concern, Taryn gently tells her not to worry about anything. Brushing a few strands of hair away from her face, he promises to carry her back to her room. He softly asks her not to push herself any further and to get plenty of rest. That same evening, the two of them quietly sit beside the window, watching the fireworks illuminate the night sky. Taryn looks genuinely happy, simply because he is finally able to spend time together with Sylvia. Seeing his smile, Sylvia cannot help smiling sincerely herself. She asks him what he thinks of the trees decorating the festival. Taran quietly replies that they are incredibly beautiful. In fact, he says he wants to remember this moment forever. One of the glowing leaves gently falls into his hand. Looking at it, Taran remarks that one day the festival will end, and eventually the flowers will wither while the trees lose their blossoms. He softly asks Sylvia whether that thought makes her sad. Sylvia gently shakes her head. Looking out the window, she replies that she does not feel sad at all. Instead, she is simply happy, because the spirits themselves are smiling. Taran quietly looks at Sylvia before softly calling her name. He places a hand on her shoulder and gently pulls her a little closer. Then he slowly leans toward her. Sylvia immediately realizes what is about to happen. Her heart begins racing as she wonders why the atmosphere suddenly feels so different. Without saying a word, Taran leans in and gently kisses her forehead. Sylvia freezes in complete shock. Unable to process what just happened, she stares at him in disbelief. Suddenly, she bolts upright in bed. Breathing heavily, Sylvia quickly realizes that everything she just experienced was only a dream. Still sitting on the bed, she places a hand against her forehead while trying to calm herself. At that exact moment, the bedroom door slowly opens. Taran is standing there. He casually asks whether she is finally awake before placing a tray of warm porridge onto the nearby dresser. Walking over to her, Taran gently places a hand against Sylvia's forehead. After checking her temperature, he sighs and remarks that, even after taking medicine, she is still running a fever. Confused, Sylvia asks what medicine he is talking about and why she needed it in the first place. Taran explains that she collapsed because of her illness. He then asks whether she remembers fainting yesterday. Taran says it was hardly surprising. After spending 2 days locked inside a freezing dungeon with no heating, Sylvia completely neglected her own health while focusing only on preparing for the festival. On top of that, she exhausted an enormous amount of magical power during yesterday's ceremony. Sylvia waves her hand, indicating that none of that is what she meant. Instead, she asks where he managed to obtain the medicine. Taran explains that many garden spirits live around medicinal herbs. Because of that, he simply went to visit his mentor, who helped him prepare the medicine. Suddenly, Sylvia remembers something extremely important. Gripping the blanket tightly, she suddenly cries out that she completely forgot about the festival. Turning toward Taran in panic, she hurriedly asks whether it is already over. Taran smiles reassuringly and tells her that the festival was a tremendous success. Then, with a playful expression, he asks whether she is actually worried because she never gave Kale her answer. Sylvia immediately exclaims that, of course, she is worried. After all, that job earned her 1,000 gold coins. The excitement quickly overwhelms her weakened body, however. Feeling dizzy once again, Sylvia collapses face first, back onto the bed. The first person Sylvia sees when she opens her eyes is Taran. He immediately asks whether she is feeling all right. Gently supporting her to keep her from falling back onto the bed, he insists that she should remain in bed and continue resting a little longer. Remembering the dream she had earlier, Sylvia looks directly at Taran and quietly asks whether he was really worried about her. Taran looks confused for a moment before asking what she means. Then, blushing slightly, he shyly admits that, of course, he was worried about her. Before either of them can say anything else, they suddenly hear someone's voice from outside the window. Sylvia turns toward the sound and immediately spots her friend standing outside. The woman grins mischievously and says that it looks like she interrupted something. Surprised, Sylvia calls out, "Ubrin?" Instead of answering properly, Ubrin simply steps back from the window, apologizes with an amused smile, and jokingly tells them to continue whatever they were doing while she waits outside. Her teasing instantly causes both Sylvia and Taran to blush bright red. Embarrassed, they quickly move away from each other. A little while later, Sylvia heads out into the garden. Ubrin lowers the hood, covering her head, finally revealing her face. The shaman smiles warmly and remarks that it has been a very long time since she last saw Sylvia. Rather than greeting her, Sylvia immediately asks whether Ubrin dyed her hair again. She adds that the new color is far too flashy. Ubrin pouts slightly at the criticism before pointing out that Sylvia has no room to talk because she changes her own hair just as often. Sylvia innocently asks whether Ubrin's hair will eventually fall out if she keeps dyeing it so frequently. Ubrin simply laughs and replies that proper hair care solves everything. Proudly running a hand through her hair, she boasts that it is much softer than before, and even offers to let Sylvia touch it. After a brief pause, the golden-haired woman notices Terran standing nearby. Curiously, she asks who he is, because he certainly does not resemble an ordinary spirit. Sylvia glances at Terran, remembering that he is actually a prince. Trying to hide his true identity, she awkwardly explains that he is something like a spirit. She adds that Terran helps people deal with amnesia. Yubrin raises an eyebrow and skeptically asks whether such a thing is actually possible. Without hesitation, Sylvia confidently insists that it absolutely is. Yubrin casually sits down on a nearby table before asking Sylvia why she called her here so urgently. She points out that, ever since they parted ways, the two of them barely kept in touch at all. Watching them together, Terran quietly asks whether Yubrin is more than just a friend, because the two of them act as though they have known each other forever. Yubrin immediately smiles and confirms that they have indeed known each other for a very long time. 5 years earlier, when Sylvia was much younger, she constantly hid from people chasing after her. One day, after remaining hidden for quite some time, the 14-year-old Sylvia cautiously emerged from her hiding place to check whether her pursuers had finally gone. Covered in dirt from head to toe, the exhausted little girl sighed that it was becoming unbearable. Not only was she forced to run away every single day, but she never even had the chance to clean herself properly. This happened only a few months after Sylvia became separated from her parents. Creditors had suddenly appeared at their home, and while the family attempted to escape, Sylvia became separated from them and ended up completely alone. Just then, someone quietly approached her from behind. The stranger asked whether the little girl was a thief. Startled, Sylvia quickly turned around and found herself face to face with a young woman with black hair. In her previous life, Sylvia had often seen people with black hair. However, after arriving in this world, this was the very first time she had encountered someone with that hair color. The little girl hurriedly insisted that she was not a thief. The mysterious woman tilted her head before asking why Sylvia was running away if that was true. After a brief sigh, she remarked that she would believe her. Even so, she remained curious about who was chasing her. Sylvia quietly started to answer that it was because of her parents. Then she suddenly stopped herself. Looking suspiciously at the stranger, she wondered why she should tell such personal information to someone she had just met. Meanwhile, the black-haired woman silently calculated how much money someone might pay if she handed Sylvia over. Seeing her thoughtful expression, Sylvia immediately suspected that the woman might actually be one of the mercenaries hired by her family's creditors. Remaining cautious, Sylvia pointed out that, before questioning complete strangers, people should introduce themselves first. The black-haired woman smiled, admitted that Sylvia was right, and apologized. She gently poked Sylvia's cheek before laughing and saying that such a tiny little girl looked surprisingly serious. Glancing around, the woman remarked that the area was becoming rather noisy. She smiled mysteriously and commented that something interesting seemed about to happen. Introducing herself, she said that her name was Han Soo-jin. Almost immediately afterward, however, she remembered that people in this world had difficulty pronouncing names like that. Sylvia froze in complete shock. Unsure whether she had imagined it, she silently stared at the woman. With a gentle smile, the black-haired woman casually said that everyone could simply call her Yubrin instead. Seeing Sylvia's stunned expression, she asked why she looked so surprised. Hearing that name, Sylvia quietly asked her to repeat it once more. Yubrin simply leaned closer and warmly said that, if it was too difficult to pronounce, Sylvia should not force herself. She could simply call her Yubrin instead. Sylvia could hardly believe what she had just heard. In the 14 years since arriving in this world, she had never once encountered a name that clearly did not belong here. Gathering her courage, Sylvia quietly introduced herself. "My name is Lee Ji-hun." A moment later, Sylvia smiled softly and added, "But in this world, she can call her Sylvia." Sylvia recalls her previous life on Earth in South Korea, where she lived as a 20-year-old woman. The last thing she remembers is drinking with her friends before dying, for an unknown reason. No matter how mysterious her death was, meeting Yubrin in this new world became a source of comfort for her. While the two shared some bread, Sylvia explained how she had died, and Yubrin laughed as she admitted that Sylvia had always been terrible at handling alcohol. When Yubrin asked how Sylvia herself had died, Sylvia recalled walking home after a math exam when a child suddenly ran out of a building and shoved her into danger. Yubrin laughed and teased that Sylvia had simply not been paying enough attention. She then remarked that fate often favors those destined to be reborn, and she doubted Sylvia's destiny was to spend her life running from creditors. Yubrin also admitted that she had originally assumed Sylvia's unusual pink hair was something she had inherited from her previous life. Sylvia sighed and explained that her hair had always been like that before asking if Yubrin would be willing to give her a place to stay. Yubrin agreed, although she warned that it could only be temporary. Thanks to Yubrin's kindness, Sylvia finally found a safe place to live. However, the shelter came with one unusual detail. It also served as the headquarters of the mercenary unit in the Jelban Empire. The moment they arrived, Yubrin threw open the door and loudly called for her father to come see the guest she had brought home. Looking back on the memory, Sylvia smiles to herself, feeling as though it all happened in another lifetime. Taran waves a hand in front of Sylvia's face, snapping her back to reality. He jokes that although she tells interesting stories, she has a habit of drifting off into daydreams. Yubrin laughs and agrees, adding that Sylvia has always been like that. She also recalls that when Sylvia was only 14 years old, she had already decided to open her own gardening shop. Yubrin then casually mentions that someone even proposed to Sylvia back then, and if she remembers correctly, the boy's name was Matthew. Taran is completely stunned by the revelation and blurts out that Sylvia was only 14 years old when someone proposed to her. Yubrin struggles to hold back her laughter at his reaction, before reminding Sylvia that she called her here for an important reason. She points out that busy people do not have much free time, so Sylvia should finally explain what is going on. Sylvia nods and admits that the matter is extremely urgent. She pulls Taran closer and explains that he is currently existing as a spirit in an astral form, while his real body remains alive somewhere else. Yubrin frowns in confusion and asks what Sylvia is talking about. She looks around in every direction, unable to see any spirit standing nearby. Without saying a word, Sylvia brushes her hand through Taran's body. The moment she does, his figure completely disappears from Yubrin's sight. Startled, Yubrin asks if Sylvia is actually serious. Sylvia replies that she believes Taran somehow lost his connection to his living body, and, for reasons she still does not understand, he has been unable to return to it. Grabbing Yubrin's hands, Sylvia pleads for her help. She explains that Taran's real body is somewhere inside the Imperial Forest, and she has no idea how to restore him on her own. However, once they arrive near the forest, Yubrin quietly shakes her head. She says that the location is still too far away, and that she cannot sense anything unusual from where they are standing. Sylvia sighs, admitting that she expected as much. However, Yubrin quickly clarifies that distance is not the real issue. She explains that no matter how dangerous a spirit may be, it is impossible for it to harm people from so far away. If Sylvia's assumptions are correct, then something incredibly powerful must have happened there. Such a problem cannot be solved without the involvement of someone possessing exceptionally strong spiritual abilities. Hearing this, Sylvia anxiously asks whether the situation can still be resolved at all. Yubrin nods and says that she believes it can. Sylvia and Taran immediately smile with relief, but Yubrin quickly interrupts their optimism. She reminds Sylvia that she already fought against the spirit inhabiting the rotten tree, making the situation far more complicated than before. Sylvia tilts her head in confusion and asks why that matters. Yubrin looks at her seriously before asking a question Sylvia has never considered. She asks whether Sylvia has ever stopped to think about why the spirit of that rotten tree wanted to harm people in the first place. Sylvia is slightly surprised and asks why the spirit of a rotten tree would want to harm people in the first place. Yubrin calmly explains that such spirits act in order to obtain what they desire most. Curious, Sylvia asks what the spirit living inside that tree could possibly want. Yubrin replies that spirits created through someone's magic often think like humans. The spirits living in Sylvia's shop resemble her personality so closely that they even share the way she thinks. That is what separates them from true spirits of nature. Sylvia then asks what that means for Taran. Yubrin explains that only spirits created by someone are capable of developing powerful personal desires. If those desires consume them, they can create complete chaos. Because of that, there is a strong possibility that the only way to break the curse on Taran is to give the rebellious spirit exactly what it has been longing for all this time. Sylvia sighs deeply and says that if that is truly the case, then she has no choice but to speak directly with the spirit herself. No matter how dangerous it may be, there seems to be no other solution besides returning to the Imperial Palace. However, Yubrin points out that there is another very real problem. Sylvia looks at her questioningly and asks what she means. Yubrin reminds Sylvia that she is not a citizen of this kingdom, Because of that, she doubts the palace guards would simply allow a foreign shaman to enter the imperial palace. Sylvia immediately realizes she is right and turns toward Terran for advice. Terran quietly says that it would be best for Sylvia to speak with his older brother herself. Even if Terran wanted to help, his real body is still lying unconscious, so he cannot exactly grant permission to anyone. Clenching her fist with determination, Sylvia spins around and declares that there is no time to waste. As the saying goes, the iron must be struck while it is still hot. Hearing this, Yubrin shouts and asks what exactly Sylvia is planning to do. Sylvia confidently replies that she is going to meet the Crown Prince personally and obtain permission for Yubrin to enter the palace. Before leaving, Sylvia tells them that until she returns, they must thoroughly water every single plant in the garden. Terran lets out a resigned sigh, while Yubrin looks completely confused. Without saying a word, Terran simply picks up a watering can and places it into Yubrin's hands. She stares first at the watering can, then at Terran, wondering how she ended up with this job. Meanwhile, Sylvia cheerfully calls out that she will pay them fairly for their work, but if they do a poor job, they will both be going without dinner. When Sylvia arrives at the Imperial Palace, she is greeted by Glenn. The servant politely explains that during the festival, His Highness granted Sylvia permission to enter and leave the palace freely. However, now that the festival has ended, no one is allowed to meet the Crown Prince without a prior appointment. Sylvia insists that her request is extremely important, but then an idea suddenly comes to her. She asks Glenn if he has a sheet of paper and a pen. Once he hands them over, Sylvia quickly writes a letter, explaining that she has found someone capable of dealing with the cursed tree. She writes that the woman is a spirit whisperer who came from another country, more specifically, the Jelban Empire. Sylvia politely asks whether the Crown Prince would permit her to enter the Imperial Palace. Glenn quietly watches as Sylvia finishes writing before she folds the letter and places it into his hands. He asks whether the matter is truly urgent, reminding her that His Highness is an extremely busy man. Sylvia firmly replies that it is very urgent. Having said everything she needed to, she thanks him and says she must leave because a customer is waiting for her back at the shop. When Sylvia returns home, she is welcomed by both Terran and Yubrin. Yubrin is already holding a letter in her hands. Terran immediately takes the heavy bags Sylvia is carrying and tells her to come inside quickly, asking if she went shopping. Sylvia smiles and says she simply bought a variety of supplies before turning her attention toward Yubrin. Yubrin explains that the letter arrived from the Imperial Palace while Sylvia was away. She assures Sylvia that she has not opened it and hands it over immediately. As Sylvia begins reading, Yubrin leans closer and quietly whispers that while Sylvia was gone, she spent some time talking with their prince, pointing toward Terran. She explains that there is an old saying about driving out one wedge with another, suggesting they may be able to use one spirit to deal with another. That very night, the three of them head toward the Imperial Palace together. Along the way, Glenn greets them and says that, just as the Crown Prince had mentioned, Yubrin is indeed the famous Black Star of the mercenaries. Sylvia laughs and remarks that the servant really did not need to escort them all the way there. However, the moment Yubrin, the golden-haired shaman, steps closer to the palace grounds, her expression immediately becomes serious. She quietly admits that the situation surrounding the cursed tree is far worse than she had originally imagined. Sylvia asks if they can really send a spirit to negotiate with the Cursed One. Yubrin confidently replies that since the Spirit of Water holds no personal grudge against the rotten tree's spirit, there should not be any problems. Extending her hand, Yubrin channels her power, and shimmering drops of water begin swirling around her palm. A moment later, the Spirit of Water appears before her, bows respectfully, and remarks that it has been a long time since they last met. The golden-haired Yubrin smiles faintly and asks whether the spirit remembers what she told him during their previous meeting. The Spirit of Water nods, saying that he remembers everything clearly. Without wasting another moment, he flies away, promising that he will return soon with an answer. Sylvia watches him disappear into the distance, slightly surprised by how businesslike their relationship seems. She comments that they only ever discuss work and never chat casually, unlike the noisy spirits around her shop that constantly surround her. Yubrin laughs and explains that it was not always like that. She says that, compared to ordinary nature spirits, those living around Sylvia are practically wild animals. Nature spirits are said to carry a deep loneliness within them, while Sylvia's spirits wake her up every morning by screaming at the top of their lungs. Sylvia sighs and admits that, despite loving them, there are times when she also wishes for a little peace and quiet. Their conversation is suddenly interrupted when they notice a surge of dark energy rising from the forest. Moments later, the spirit of water returns. Yubrin remarks that it looks like someone must have driven him away, before asking whether he managed to get an answer. The spirit nods and says that he discovered exactly what the rotten tree spirit desires, although he believes the request is completely insane. Even so, he thinks these two girls might actually be capable of fulfilling it. The spirit of water explains that the spirit's greatest wish is to be loved by the one who created her. She longs to receive the creator's love, the deep emotional bond shared between a magician and the spirit they personally brought into existence. According to him, the rotten tree spirit desires that feeling so desperately that she is willing to destroy herself in pursuit of it. Sylvia presses a hand against her forehead and mutters that the spirit is unbelievably selfish. Yubrin then asks whether there is any method capable of granting that wish. Sylvia shakes her head and points out the obvious problem. If the spirit's creator is already dead, then fulfilling such a desire would be impossible. She jokes that the only option would be to find a necromancer, then sadly concludes that the tree must have rotted away because its creator never gave it the love it desperately craved. Sylvia eventually sighs and says that, just as she suspected, she still needs to visit Taryn's real body and speak directly with the cursed spirit herself. Glenn quietly nods and reminds her that they already have the Crown Prince's permission, so they are free to proceed however they think is necessary. With renewed determination, Sylvia steps forward, realizing that convincing the spirit is now her only remaining option. She enters the chamber where Taryn's real body lies unconscious and slowly pulls back the curtains. Stepping onto the balcony, Sylvia immediately spots the same woman sitting silently within the branches of the cursed tree. Letting out a quiet sigh, she calls out to her. The dark-haired spirit immediately looks over in surprise before approaching Sylvia with narrowed eyes, asking whether she has come simply because she wants to die by her hands. Sylvia calmly replies that she finally understands what the spirit truly wants. She tells the woman that she is willing to search for the spirit's creator, if only the spirit can provide even the smallest clue about that person's identity. The rotten tree's spirit suddenly erupts in anger, shouting at Sylvia not to mock her. She bitterly asks whether Sylvia really intends to search for someone she knows absolutely nothing about. The spirit then glances toward Taryn's unconscious body and coldly remarks that if she dies, Sylvia's friend will awaken. Sylvia quietly admits that the spirit is absolutely right. She honestly says that she could either save the woman or destroy her so that Taryn can live again. However, she also reveals that she has another option, one that very few people know about. Among those connected to the spirit world exists a forbidden technique known as forced extermination. By sacrificing half of their own magical power, a spirit caster can completely erase a spirit against its will. The price is terrifying. Half of the caster's strength disappears forever, leaving them permanently weakened. Although legends claim that the lost power might one day return, every known attempt to restore it has ultimately failed. Because of that, almost no spirit caster is willing to perform the ritual. It is regarded as an absolute last resort, reserved only for situations where someone's life is truly at stake. Looking directly into the spirit's eyes, Sylvia quietly asks whether the spirit of the rotten tree truly wishes for her to make that choice. Sylvia quietly says that if that is truly what the spirit wants, then there is only one solution that could satisfy everyone. She gently explains that the spirit is not evil, she is simply sick. Hearing those words, the dark-haired woman clenches her fists in silence. Sylvia continues, saying that she does not know why the spirit longs so desperately for the love only her creator could have given her, but she wants to discover the truth behind those feelings. The woman stares at Sylvia and asks if she truly means that. Without hesitation, Sylvia nods. After a brief silence, the spirit slowly extends her hand toward Sylvia. Taryn and Yubrin immediately become worried as they watch from behind, but before either of them can react, the black-haired woman surrounds Sylvia with thick, dark energy. She tells Sylvia that she will show her everything herself. If Sylvia truly wishes to bring this tragedy to an end in the best possible way for both of them, then she must simply follow her. The dark energy completely engulfs Sylvia, and after a few moments, her vision fades into darkness. When she finally opens her eyes again, she finds herself standing on the balcony of what appears to be the very same palace. Looking around in confusion, she realizes that she is still alive. Just then, she hears footsteps somewhere behind her and cautiously walks into the corridor to investigate. As Sylvia descends the staircase, she notices that the palace looks almost identical to the one where Taryn's real body is resting, yet everything feels slightly different, as though she has traveled into another time. Soon, she notices a strange energy flowing from a nearby doorway. Drawn toward it, she steps outside into the garden. Standing there is a young man with brown hair. After politely greeting someone who is leaving the garden, he places his hand against a nearby tree and channels his magic into it. Sylvia quietly watches from behind the doorway before her gaze shifts toward the tree itself. Her eyes widen in shock as she realizes it is the very same rotten tree. Except in this moment, it is healthy and breathtakingly beautiful. Unable to hide her surprise, Sylvia softly wonders how such a magnificent tree could have ended up becoming the cursed monster she knows. The moment the words leave her mouth, she freezes, realizing that her voice can actually be heard in this place. The young man immediately turns toward the sound before walking over to the doorway where Sylvia is standing. When he steps inside and sees her, the young man looks genuinely astonished. He asks whether she is a spirit. Sylvia blinks in confusion, realizing that he addressed her as though she were one. She wonders whether he somehow knows who she is, but instead of questioning her further, the brown-haired man circles around her with great curiosity, carefully examining her from every angle. After inspecting her for a moment, he cheerfully remarks that she must be a pink-haired spirit. He excitedly asks whether she was born from a flower or if she is one of the free spirits of nature. Sylvia cannot help thinking that the man is incredibly noisy. He suddenly sighs and says that he is absolutely certain he never created a spirit like her. Sylvia quickly realizes that the man has no intention of waiting for her answers. He casually concludes that she probably does not possess any remarkable abilities before unexpectedly dropping to one knee and looking toward the heavens. With complete sincerity, he declares that today is the day he finally met a true spirit of nature. Feeling slightly more at ease, Sylvia asks whether he is a spirit charmer. The young man smiles proudly and confirms that she guessed correctly. He introduces himself as the royal spirit spellcaster, serving the court, and says that his name is Caliph. Caliph shakes Sylvia's hand with a warm smile and says that it is nice to meet her. However, Sylvia's attention is quickly drawn elsewhere when she notices a tree covered in beautiful pink blossoms. Caliph smiles and remarks that she is probably a tree spirit rather than a flower spirit. Walking over to the blossoming tree, he gently places a hand on its trunk and says that it has been a long time since he last saw it bloom. He adds that Sylvia, with her pink hair, resembles a flower bud herself. Sylvia is completely bewildered by what she is seeing. The tree before her is unmistakably a cherry blossom tree, yet Korean cherry trees did not exist in this world until she introduced them herself. Even more unbelievable is the identity of the man standing before her. Caliph was the name of a legendary spirit spellcaster who had lived several centuries ago. He was renowned throughout history for his incredible mastery over spirits, and even wrote an autobiography to pass down his knowledge, especially to future spirit spellcasters capable of communicating with plant spirits. Aside from that single book, almost no reliable information about him had survived the passage of time. Gathering her thoughts, Sylvia turns to Caliph and says that she has a question. Caliph smiles and replies that she appears to have been born only recently, so it is natural that she would be curious about many things. He invites her to ask whatever is on her mind. Sylvia recalls that he had assumed he was not her creator, and therefore believed she probably possessed no extraordinary abilities. Curious, she asks him what exactly he meant by that. Caliph walks over to the tree once more and explains that he has been taking care of it for quite some time. As soon as he touches the trunk, the spirit of the tree emerges before them. Sylvia immediately recognizes her. It is the same woman who would eventually become the spirit of the rotten tree. Caliph explains that the spirit possesses two unique abilities. The first allows her to show others everything she has personally witnessed, while the second enables someone to experience the events of her life firsthand, as though they were living through her memories themselves. Before Sylvia realizes it, spring arrives once again. She awakens from her slumber and stretches lazily, but as soon as she turns around, she sees the same green-haired spirit standing behind her. Unlike before, the spirit looks deeply saddened. In a quiet voice, she says that Caliph still has not returned. Sylvia asks how long he has been gone, and a troubling thought crosses her mind as she begins to wonder just how much time has truly passed. Sylvia realizes that it had been winter the entire time, and that she had spent those months asleep, just as a spirit naturally would. Confused, she tries to make sense of it, but the green-haired spirit suddenly grabs her hands in disbelief. She asks how such a thing is even possible. wondering how a spirit of nature could sleep through an entire season without noticing the passage of time. Before Sylvia can answer, someone approaches them from behind. The green-haired spirit turns around, and the moment she recognizes the newcomer, her face lights up with joy. She happily cries out Khalif's name before running toward him and throwing her arms around him in a warm embrace. Khalif apologizes with a gentle smile, admitting that he had promised to visit them more often but had failed to keep that promise. The tree spirit shakes her head and assures him that everything is fine as long as he comes more often from now on. She eagerly asks if he truly means it, and Khalifa smiles in response. Watching the scene unfold, Sylvia is struck by a painful realization. From the perspective of a spirit that could live for hundreds or even thousands of years, human lives were heartbreakingly short. Khalif then says that he has come today to give them his final gift. Sylvia's heart sinks as she immediately understands what he means. Before anyone can stop him, Khalif channels his magic, and countless flowers, trees, and plants instantly burst into bloom throughout the garden. The once quiet landscape is transformed into a paradise overflowing with life, but the moment his spell is complete, Khalif's body collapses lifelessly to the ground. The green-haired spirit falls to her knees beside him, unable to hold back her tears. She cries in utter despair because Khalif had been the most precious person in her entire existence. Sylvia watches in silence, understanding the spirit's unbearable grief. Yet, even as the years continued to pass, the spirit created by Khalif could never truly accept the loss of her creator, unlike the natural spirits who eventually embraced the cycle of life and death. Many years later, two men wandered through the abandoned garden and noticed a massive ebony tree. One of them frowned and remarked that the tree looked as though it had withered in anger. As he stepped closer, he examined its trunk and concluded that it could not be saved. He speculated that insects had likely infested it and hollowed it out from within. Turning to his companion, he suggested that perhaps they should simply cut it down instead of waiting for spring. The other man nodded in agreement but suddenly froze. He looked down in confusion and told his companion that his hand had started turning black. The blond man initially failed to understand what he meant, but when he raised his own hand to look more closely, a chilling presence emerged behind him. The spirit of the rotten tree silently appeared, her eyes filled with endless resentment. Terrified, the two men immediately fled, but their efforts were futile. Throughout the years, countless people had tried to destroy the cursed tree, using fire, poison, and every method imaginable. Even those gifted with powerful abilities had failed to eliminate it. The spirit of the rotten tree had come to believe that no one could possibly understand the pain she carried after losing the person who had created her. Even the magnificent garden Khalif had lovingly raised had eventually forgotten him and continued existing as though he had never been there. As Sylvia witnessed these memories, she wondered if such loneliness was truly possible. Could someone really continue living as though nothing had happened after losing the one person who meant everything to them? The thought weighed heavily on her heart as the spirit's sorrow became clearer with every passing memory. Then, one day, the spirit sensed someone entering the abandoned garden. She turned toward the sound and saw Taran, the young prince, walking through the forest accompanied by several servants. Taran calmly explained that he wanted this palace because he had fallen in love with its beautiful garden. Glenn respectfully warned His Highness that the area was considered dangerous, but Taran paid little attention to the warning. Instead, Taran quietly remarked that the trees growing in this garden felt strangely familiar. They reminded him of the ones surrounding the mansion where he and his brother had once lived together for a time. Sylvia silently watched as the young prince stepped into what would become his new residence. The spirit of the rotten tree gazed at him from above and murmured that the prince had lived there for quite a long time now. Slowly descending from the branches, she whispered to herself that she no longer wanted to remain there alone. After sacrificing countless people, the spirit of the rotten tree lowers her head and quietly admits that Sylvia, the other plants around her, and even innocent people are all suffering because of her existence. Looking at the pink-haired young woman, she says that if Sylvia is truly a spirit who has lived for centuries, then perhaps she should simply destroy her before she becomes even more troublesome. Sylvia stares at her in confusion and asks what she is talking about. The woman closes her eyes and explains that everyone keeps forcing her to continue existing, even though doing so only brings pain to herself and everyone around her. People will never stop trying to get rid of her, so it is only a matter of time before someone finally succeeds. The spirit of the rotten tree bitterly adds that if every attempt fails or everyone eventually gives up, then nothing will ever change, and her endless suffering will continue forever. As Sylvia listens, she finally understands the truth. The spirit had never been able to end her own life because Taryn was not the kind of person who would mindlessly cut down a tree simply because it had become ugly or cursed. Instead, he had continued caring for the tree, unknowingly preventing the spirit's greatest wish from being fulfilled. She had longed for death, but because of Taryn's kindness, even that wish had remained out of reach. All that remained for her was an endless passage of time filled with loneliness. Watching Taryn from a distance, Sylvia quietly remarks that he has grown up so much since the memories first began. The dark-haired woman suddenly tells Sylvia that she, too, is about to disappear. Startled, Sylvia asks what she means, but the spirit calmly tells her to look at her own hands. When Sylvia lowers her gaze, she is horrified to see that her fingers are gradually becoming transparent, as though her existence within the memory is beginning to fade away. Before Sylvia can react, she hears footsteps approaching the garden. A servant respectfully asks His Majesty where he is going, and the prince casually replies that he is only taking a short walk and will return soon. The spirit of the rotten tree watches him in silence before saying that if people call him a prince, then he must be someone precious to the kingdom. Because of that, they would have no hesitation in sacrificing her if it meant protecting someone as important as him. The woman slowly turns towards Sylvia and says that the young woman no longer has much time left inside this memory. Instead of allowing herself to disappear without accomplishing anything, she believes it would be better to claim the prince's soul before leaving. With that, she immediately returns to her tree and releases a wave of dark energy that spreads silently through the garden. Taryn senses the strange aura and pauses, wondering where the sweet fragrance filling the air is coming from. Sylvia immediately realizes what is about to happen. She desperately screams for him to stop and begs him not to go any closer, asking if the spirit truly intends to steal his soul. The woman coldly replies that humans are destined to face danger, and that the prince is always surrounded by people who would try to protect him. If she is going to take his soul, now is the perfect opportunity. The spirit unleashes her dark power toward Taryn. Without thinking, Sylvia throws herself between them, taking the full force of the attack herself. The spirit of the rotten tree stares at her in disbelief, while Sylvia immediately turns toward Taryn. She sees that one of his hands has already begun turning black from the curse. Rushing to his side, she grabs his shoulders and desperately shakes him, shouting for Taryn to come back to his senses. She cries out that if his soul has already left his body, then he must return immediately. Taryn looks down at his blackened hand in confusion and asks what is happening. Sylvia continues shouting, ordering him to leave that body at once and come to her instead. Although bewildered, Taryn instinctively follows her instructions. Moments later, the servants rush toward the prince in alarm. As chaos erupts around them, Sylvia reaches out and grabs the dark-haired spirit. Her own body begins dissolving into countless particles of light. But before she completely disappears, she cries out one final message to the prince, saying that he will always find her in Sylvia's flower garden. Sylvia suddenly opens her eyes and finds herself lying on a sofa. Slowly sitting up, she looks around in confusion, wondering where she is. The first person she sees is His Highness the Crown Prince, who is watching her with a faint smile. He asks if she has finally woken up, and remarks that she somehow managed to fall asleep even in such cold weather. He explains that he wanted to carry her to a proper bedroom, but there were too many people around, and doing so would have attracted unnecessary attention. Sylvia dusts off her dress and smiles reassuringly. She tells him that it is perfectly fine, because the sofa is made of such high-quality material that her back does not hurt at all. Jokingly, she says that it might actually be more comfortable than the bed in her own house. After straightening her clothes, she heads toward the door, but the Crown Prince calls after her, asking if she is leaving already. He then wonders when she plans to visit again. Turning back, Sylvia tells him that there is something she urgently needs to investigate. However, she promises that she will return within a week to check on him. The ruby-haired prince nods thoughtfully before asking whether she and the other girl will both be coming. He then raises a hand to summon Glenn, who immediately steps forward and respectfully announces that he is awaiting His Highness's orders. The Crown Prince instructs Glenn to make the necessary arrangements according to the situation. He also orders him to assign a knight to escort Sylvia safely to her destination. Glenn bows respectfully and assures His Highness that everything will be taken care of before excusing himself to carry out the command. As Sylvia walks through the palace corridors, she notices a familiar knight waiting for her. He greets her with a friendly smile before accompanying her back to Sylvia's flower garden. When they arrive, Sylvia thanks him for escorting her safely and wishes him a pleasant day. The knight politely bids her farewell before returning to his duties. Inside the shop, Yubrin looks toward the departing knight before asking Sylvia who he was. Sylvia casually replies that he is simply a knight they know and that they have spoken a few times before. However, before their conversation can continue, Sylvia notices an unpleasant-looking man standing directly in front of the shop. His aggressive demeanor immediately puts her on guard, and she asks Yubrin who he is. Yubrin glances toward the entrance and explains that everything had remained quiet while the Imperial Knight was nearby. However, the moment he left, the man appeared. She believes he has come specifically to see Sylvia and is most likely another customer of the flower garden. Sylvia begins to explain that the shop is currently closed, but before she can finish speaking, an angry pounding echoes through the building. The man pounds on the door with all his strength, shouting for someone to open it immediately. He yells that he knows perfectly well someone is inside and accuses them of pretending otherwise. Growing impatient, he completely loses his temper and suddenly kicks the door with enough force to break it open. Sylvia stares in disbelief as the damaged door swings inward. Furious, Sylvia marches straight to the entrance and demands to know what he thinks he is doing. The man shouts back that he had called out repeatedly and that no one had bothered to answer him. Sylvia angrily points out that there was a clearly posted notice stating that the shop was temporarily closed and not accepting customers. She tells him that barging into a closed business like this is completely unacceptable. Instead of apologizing, the man laughs arrogantly and boasts that his client is none other than the king himself. Sylvia narrows her eyes before calmly replying that, within the walls of her own shop, she is the queen. Her sharp response leaves the surrounding onlookers speechless. Sylvia studies the emblem attached to the man's clothing and immediately recognizes the crest of his employer. She calmly explains that forcing his way into a closed shop constitutes attempted robbery, while breaking down the door is clear destruction of private property. Furthermore, she points out that he is not one of her regular clients. Looking directly at him, she asks if he serves Count Pronia, having already guessed his affiliation. The man is left speechless. Sylvia continues by explaining that noble families with whom she regularly conducts business have an entirely separate method of contacting her. No respectable household would ever send a servant to behave in such a disgraceful manner. She coldly informs him that regardless of how influential his master may be, such conduct immediately disqualifies them from any future business relationship with her. Turning away, Sylvia states that she will personally inform the Count's butler about today's incident so that the household can exercise better judgment in the future. The growing crowd begins whispering among themselves, and several people remark that the cost of repairing the broken door will almost certainly be charged to Count Pronia's household. Finally, Sylvia closes the damaged door as best she can and announces that Sylvia's flower garden will reopen the following week. She politely asks everyone to return then if they still wish to place an order. Once the crowd begins to disperse, Sylvia lets out a weary sigh and quietly tells herself that she needs to settle everything as quickly as possible so that her business can finally return to normal. Sylvia lets out a tired sigh as she sits down at the table. Rubbing her temples, she complains that troublesome nobles, investigators, and intelligence officers seem to appear one after another these days. It feels as though the moment she solves one problem, another immediately arrives at her doorstep. Across from her, Yubrin tilts her head in confusion and asks what kind of intelligence officers Sylvia is talking about. Sylvia pauses for a moment as the question reminds her of something that happened not long ago. During one of her visits to the Imperial Palace, she had run into the familiar purple-haired knight. He greeted her politely, and Sylvia happily remarked that it had been quite a while since they had last seen each other. She also apologized for causing trouble during the festival when she had collapsed from overusing her magic. The knight gently placed a hand on her head and reassured her that there was nothing to apologize for. He had already been informed that she had fainted from exhaustion, so he held no ill feelings toward her. Smiling warmly, he suggested that they continue their conversation while walking, explaining that he had been assigned to escort and protect her. He also admitted that there was something he wanted to ask her. As they made their way through the palace grounds, Sylvia curiously asked what was on his mind. The knight remained silent for a moment before asking an unexpected question. If Sylvia were ever offered the opportunity to move to another country, what would she do? Sylvia immediately narrowed her eyes and asked whether he was talking about recruitment by foreign intelligence agencies. She then questioned which country he had in mind. The knight chuckled awkwardly and said that she was surprisingly perceptive. He claimed it was only a hypothetical example before mentioning the Vebis Empire. Sylvia noticed that his example was far too specific to be a coincidence, but the knight merely smiled and explained that he was speaking generally. After all, someone as talented as Sylvia would naturally attract attention from many different nations. Returning to the present, Sylvia leans back in her chair and lets out another sigh. She says that this is only one of the many problems she has been dealing with lately. Yubrin nods and points out another issue. Since Sylvia's flower garden has remained closed for so long, many customers who could not wait have already found other gardeners to handle their requests. Those who continue waiting are likely doing so because they believe only Sylvia can fulfill their orders. Hearing that, Sylvia stands up and decides that she needs to resolve everything as quickly as possible. She heads out into the garden, where she is immediately surrounded by cheerful little fairies. They happily greet her and ask whether something has happened. Instead of answering directly, Sylvia suddenly asks them whether they have ever suffered from a lack of love. The fairies stare at her blankly before asking what she even means by a lack of love. Sylvia hesitates, trying to think of a simple way to explain such a complicated concept. Finally, she asks whether they know about the rotten tree growing within the imperial palace. Clarifying her question, she explains that she is referring to the spirit living inside that cursed tree before recounting everything she learned from the spirit's memories. When she finishes, the fairies pout and complain that she should have explained things properly from the beginning. How are they supposed to understand when she suddenly started talking about a lack of love without any context? Frustrated, Sylvia throws up her hands and exclaims that even if she explained it step by step like training a dog, they probably still would not understand. The fairies immediately exchange confused looks and begin wondering aloud what she means by training a dog. Realizing that her analogy only made things even more confusing, Sylvia presses a hand against her forehead and decides it is better not to explain any further. Fortunately, one of the fairies suddenly speaks up and says that her theory about the spirit's lack of love may actually be correct. The fairy explains that the spirit created by Caliph possessed two extraordinary abilities, something extremely unusual for an artificial spirit. If that was the case, then perhaps she naturally desired more attention and affection than ordinary spirits. Spirits born through a human's magic often inherit aspects of their creator's emotions, and the more powerful such a spirit becomes, the deeper and more intense those emotions can grow.